Texas Rail Mysteries blog. Posted by Colton Gray, March 15th, 2025, 11:47 p.m. I've been running this blog for 3 years now, documenting the stranger side of Texas railroad history. Ghost towns, abandoned depots, forgotten tragedies, that's my beat. But what happened tonight near Marfa has me questioning everything I thought I knew about the difference between history and legend. The drive out to the old Burlington Northern Line takes you through country, so empty it feels like the edge of the world. Scrub brush and mesquite stretch to horizons that seem to curve away from you, and the silence is so complete it rings in your ears. I've made this trip dozens of times, chasing stories about the 1952 derailment, the missing Chinese workers from the 1880s, the usual catalog of railroad ghosts that every line accumulates over a century of service. This time felt different from the moment I turned off Highway 90. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky the color of rust and old blood, when my radio crackled to life. Static first, then a voice, official, clipped, urgent. Unauthorized rail activity reported on the abandoned Burlington Northern Corridor between mile markers 347 and 351. All civilian traffic advised to avoid the area until further notice. Repeat, do not approach active railway operations in this sector. Active railway operations. On a line that's been dead for 30 years. I pulled over, notebook already in my lap, scribbling down the details. Mile markers 347 to 351. That put the activity right where I was headed, near the old Presidio Junction switching station. The building's been empty since the Carter administration, windows boarded up, weeds growing through the platform boards. Last time I was there, a family of rattlesnakes had made themselves at home in what used to be the ticket office. The transmission cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a wash of static that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I fiddled with the dial, trying to pick up the signal again, but found only dead air across the entire band. Even the AM stations out of El Paso had gone quiet. That should have been my first warning. I drove on, drawn by the same compulsion that's led me down every rabbit hole of Texas railroad lore for the past decade. My grandfather used to say I inherited his nose for mysteries, back when I was 8 years old, and pestering him for stories about his days working the Santa Fe line. He'd tell me about the phantom trains, locomotives that appeared on abandoned tracks, conductors who punched tickets for passengers that weren't there, whistles that echoed from rails that had been torn up years before. Just stories, he'd always finish, ruffling my hair. Nothing but stories, Colt. But his eyes would get distant when he said it, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Grandfather disappeared when I was 15. Drove out to investigate some railroad mystery near these same tracks, and never came home. The official report said he'd had a heart attack, wandered off in confusion, died of exposure somewhere in the desert. They never found his body. Never found his car, either, though they searched for weeks. 25 years later, I'm still searching for answers he never found. The old switching station materialized out of the dusk like something from a fever dream. Adobe walls the color of dried bone, tin roof buckled and torn, the skeletal remains of loading cranes reaching up toward the first stars. I parked next to the platform and killed the engine, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through abandoned structures. The silence was absolute. No coyotes, no insects, no distant hum of highway traffic. Just the kind of profound quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the small sounds of being alive in a dead place. I walked the platform first, photographing the decay with the methodical patience of someone who's documented dozens of these forgotten places. Broken bottles ground to sea glass by decades of wind. Graffiti in languages I couldn't read. The ghost outlines of old schedules still visible on a weathered bulletin board, promising connections to places that no longer existed. That's when I heard it, a whistle, distant, mournful, carrying across the desert from somewhere to the east. The kind of sound that raises the hair on your arms and sends ice water down your spine, because you absolutely know that there shouldn't be any trains out here. Haven't been for 3 decades. I froze, camera halfway to my eye, and listened. The whistle came again, closer this time, with the distinctive 2 long, 1 short, 1 long pattern of an approaching locomotive. Warning signals from an era when engineers had to announce their presence to avoid collisions on single-track lines. My rational mind cataloged the possible explanations. Sound carries strangely in desert air. Could be a truck's air brakes from the highway. Could be wind through the old water tower. Could be a dozen things that weren't what it sounded like. But when the whistle sounded a 3rd time, I could swear I heard the rumble of a diesel engine underneath it, the rhythmic clack of wheels on rails that hadn't seen a train since Reagan was president. I grabbed my flashlight and scrambled down from the platform, following the old roadbed east toward the sound. The ties were still there, half buried in sand and spotted with creosote stains, but the rails had been salvaged years ago for scrap. Nothing left but the memory of a railroad, ghost tracks leading into the darkness. That's when I found it, a railway spike, lying across one of the buried ties like someone had just dropped it there. The metal was warm to the touch despite the cool desert air, and when I picked it up, I could swear I felt a vibration running through it, like the echo of some massive impact traveling up from the earth itself. The whistle sounded once more, so close now that I spun around, expecting to see headlights bearing down on me. But there was nothing, just empty desert and the skeletal remains of the switching station silhouetted against the stars. That's when my radio crackled back to life, but the voice that emerged wasn't the same official emergency broadcaster from before. This voice was older, refined, with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to making announcements to crowds. All aboard the westbound evening service. Next stops, Presidio Junction, Valentine, Van Horn. Please have your tickets ready for collection. All aboard. The transmission faded into static, then silence. I'm back home now, the railway spike sitting on my desk next to my keyboard, still warm after a 2-hour drive. I've been researching the old Burlington Northern schedules, trying to match that announcement to historical timetables, but the records are incomplete. Too many gaps, too many missing years. But I found something else. Something that's kept me awake all night, staring out my window at the darkness beyond the city lights. My grandfather's last blog post, the one I found in his files after he disappeared. He wrote about hearing train whistles on dead tracks, about finding warm railway spikes in impossible places, about voices on the radio announcing departures from stations that no longer existed. The post was dated 3 days before he vanished. And according to the timestamp, it was published online yesterday. Comments 0, share archive. Posted by Colton Gray, March 18th, 2025, 2:33 a.m. 3 days since my first encounter at Presidio Junction, and I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that conductor's voice announcing departures from a station that's been dead for 30 years. The railway spike sits on my nightstand now, still warm to the touch, pulsing with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. I spent yesterday morning in the Texas State Archives, digging through railroad employment records from the 1980s and 90s. What I found sent me driving straight to Sanderson, looking for someone who might remember the old days on the Burlington Northern Line. Her name is Naomi Beck, and she's the reason I'm writing this at 3 in the morning instead of trying to sleep. The Sanderson Rail Depot Museum is little more than a converted caboose and a handful of display cases, but Naomi has been its volunteer curator for 15 years. I found her there yesterday afternoon, a compact woman in her 70s with silver hair, pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She was arranging photographs of long-dead railroad workers when I walked in, her movements precise and economical. "You're the one writing about the phantom train," she said without looking up. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd been expecting me. I hadn't mentioned the phantom train in any of my blog posts. Hadn't used those words anywhere online. "How did you?" "Your grandfather came to see me in 1987, she interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "Same questions you're probably here to ask. Same look in his eyes, too. Like he'd seen something that didn't fit with the way the world's supposed to work." The blood drained from my face. I'd never told anyone about my grandfather's interest in railroad mysteries. Had barely mentioned him in my blog, and never by name. "Thomas Gray," she continued, watching my reaction. "Railroad insurance investigator. Came here asking about the westbound evening service, about conductors who worked routes that didn't exist on any official timetable." I told him the same thing I'm going to tell you. She walked to a filing cabinet in the corner, her shoes clicking against the worn linoleum with the precision of someone who'd spent decades walking the length of train cars. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a manila folder, yellowed with age and held together with a rubber band that had long since lost its elasticity. "Some stories are better left buried," she said, but she handed me the folder anyway. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, dating back to the 1950s. Black and white images of railroad workers, some posed formally in front of locomotives, others candid shots taken during shift changes and meal breaks. But it was the last set of photos that made my mouth go dry. 6 men standing beside the abandoned Presidio Junction switching station. The building looked exactly as it did when I visited 3 days ago. Boarded windows, buckled roof, weeds growing through the platform. But these photos were clearly decades old, judging by the clothing and the quality of the film stock. My grandfather stood third from the left. "This was taken in October 1987, Naomi said quietly. 3 weeks before your grandfather disappeared. He'd assembled a group of researchers, people who'd been tracking reports of phantom train sightings across West Texas. They called themselves followers. My hands trembled as I studied the faces. All middle-aged men, all with the same intense expression I'd seen in my grandfather's eyes during his rare, unguarded moments. The same expression I'd been seeing in my own reflection lately. What happened to them? Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the display case with the rhythm of wheels on tracks. Outside, the afternoon wind had picked up, rattling the windows of the converted caboose and carrying the distant sound of actual trains from the active line that still ran through Sanderson. They disappeared, one by one, over the course of a month. Officially, it was a series of unrelated incidents. Heart attacks, car accidents, people just wandering off into the desert. But I knew better. I'd seen this pattern before. She pulled out another folder, this one containing newspaper clippings and official reports. Headlines about missing persons, unexplained accidents, search parties that found nothing but empty clothes and personal effects scattered across the desert. Every 37 years, she said. Like clockwork. 1913, 1950, 1987. Always the same pattern. People start seeing the phantom train, hearing the conductor's announcements. They gather together, thinking they can solve the mystery through collaboration. And then they disappear. 2024, I whispered, doing the math. It should have happened again last year. Should have. Naomi's expression grew troubled. But it didn't. The cycle broke somehow, and that worries me more than if it had continued on schedule. Something's changed. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Emergency services reports equipment malfunctions along historic rail corridor. Multiple vehicle breakdowns reported near mile markers 347 to 351. Avoid area until further notice. The same mile markers from the radio broadcast 3 days ago. You need to leave this alone, Naomi said, noticing my reaction to the message. Whatever happened to break the cycle, whatever's keeping the phantom train active past its normal schedule, it's not something you want to be involved with. But even as she spoke, she was pulling out more photographs, more documents. A part of her wanted to tell the story, to finally share the burden of knowledge she'd been carrying for decades. The last photograph in the collection showed a group of children playing near the Presidio Junction station, sometime in the 1960s. They were laughing, completely unaware of the camera, caught in a moment of pure childhood joy. But in the background, barely visible in the shadow of the switching station, stood a figure in a conductor's uniform. A figure that looked exactly like my grandfather. The phantom train doesn't just take people, Naomi said softly. It makes them part of the crew. Your grandfather didn't disappear, Mr. Gray. He went to work. I left Sanderson as the sun was setting, Naomi's warnings echoing in my ears along with something else. The distant sound of a train whistle, impossibly clear despite the 40 miles between me and the abandoned Burlington Northern Line. The radio in my car had been acting up all afternoon, picking up fragments of conversations that didn't quite make sense. Voices discussing departure times for routes that hadn't existed since the 1950s. Schedule changes for trains that had never been scheduled. And underneath it all, a rhythmic clicking that sounded like telegraph keys spelling out messages in code I couldn't read. 20 minutes outside Sanderson, the radio crackled to life with a clear transmission. County emergency services report multiple equipment malfunctions along historic rail corridor. All electronic devices experiencing interference patterns consistent with electromagnetic anomalies. Citizens advised to report any unusual activity to local authorities immediately. The broadcast cut out, replaced by that same measured voice I'd heard 3 nights ago. Attention passengers. Due to scheduling adjustments, the westbound evening service will be making additional stops. Please remain seated until the conductor has collected all tickets. Thank you for riding with us. I'm home now, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me back from Sanderson. The railway spike on my nightstand is warmer than ever, and twice tonight I've thought I heard footsteps on my front porch, the measured pace of someone used to walking the narrow aisles of moving train cars. There's something else, too. Something I found in my grandfather's folder when I got home and spread everything out on my kitchen table. A train ticket. Westbound evening service, departing Presidio Junction. The date stamp is October 15th, 1987, the day my grandfather disappeared. The ticket is warm to the touch, and it's got my name on it. Comments 0, share archive. Posted by Colton Gray, March 21st, 2025, 4:17 a.m. The train ticket disappeared sometime during the night. I'd left it on my kitchen table next to the photographs from Naomi's collection, weighted down with my grandfather's railway spike. When I woke up this morning, if you can call 3 hours of fitful sleep waking up, the table was empty except for a thin layer of rust-colored dust arranged in the exact shape of the missing ticket. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with something that followed normal rules. I've spent the last 72 hours diving deeper into the digital rabbit hole than I've ever gone before. What I found there has me questioning not just the phantom train, but the very nature of the internet itself. Because apparently, there are corners of the web where the dead continue to post, where forums discuss schedules for trains that don't exist, and where my grandfather has been leaving breadcrumbs for 38 years. It started with a simple Google search, Phantom Train Texas Followers 1987. The first few results were predictable: local newspaper archives, historical society newsletters, the usual collection of half-remembered folklore that forms the background static of any regional mystery. But buried on page 4 of the search results was something that made my blood freeze. A forum post from railroadmysteries.net, dated March 19, 2025. 2 days ago, the username was Tigray1949, my grandfather's initials and birth year. The post was simple. Coordinates: 30.4721 degrees north, 104.0198 degrees west. Come alone. The westbound evening service is always on time. Those coordinates put you right at the abandoned Presidio Junction switching station. I created an account and dove into the forum's archives, following a trail of digital breadcrumbs that stretched back years. Tigray1949 had been active since the site launched in 2003, posting cryptic messages about railroad schedules, sharing coordinates for abandoned stations, and engaging in conversations with other users who seemed to know far more about phantom trains than any living person should. The most recent conversation thread, started just last week, was titled "New Conductor Needed, Evening Service." Tigray1949, schedule changes coming. Current crew aging out. Need someone with the family connection. Railroad experience preferred, but not required. Will train on the job. Whistle in the dark, the cycle's broken. Shouldn't be recruiting outside the scheduled years. Tigray1949, management adapted. New circumstances require new approaches. The boy has the bloodline. He'll understand when he's ready. Ticketmaster 67. What if he doesn't want to understand? Tigray1949, they never do. But the westbound evening service must maintain its schedule. The conversation continued for pages, discussing crew rotations and passenger manifests and terminal assignments in language that seemed half railroad jargon, half something else entirely. Other users chimed in with usernames like Deadman Switches, Rust and Bone, and End of the Line, all talking about the phantom train like it was a real operation with real logistics. That's when I noticed the timestamps. Every post in the conversation had been made between 11:47 p.m. and 11:52 p.m. The exact same 5-minute window, repeated across different dates stretching back months. As if whatever was posting could only access the internet during those specific minutes each night. I screenshot everything, building a digital dossier of evidence that my rational mind kept insisting couldn't be real. Forums don't work that way. The dead don't maintain user accounts. Ghosts don't participate in online discussions about railroad scheduling. But the evidence was there, documented and archived, growing more extensive the deeper I dug. That's when my phone rang. Mr. Gray? This is Alice Pryor with the Texas Department of Transportation. I understand you've been researching historical rail incidents in the Presidio area. The voice was professional, clipped, with the kind of practiced neutrality that comes from years of dealing with bureaucratic complications. But there was something underneath it, a tension that suggested this wasn't a routine call. I run a blog about railroad history, I said carefully. Is there a problem? No problem at all. Actually, I'm quite impressed with your research. Very thorough. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have some additional historical documents that might interest you. Nothing classified, just some old safety reports that never made it into the public archives. Something about the call felt wrong. The timing coming so soon after my deep dive into the phantom train forums. The way she'd found my number, which wasn't listed anywhere on my blog. The slight echo in her voice, like she was calling from a large, empty room. How did you get my contact information? A pause, just long enough to notice. Your blog's contact form. You responded to my inquiry last week. I'd received no inquiry. Hadn't responded to any emails from DOT personnel. But I agreed to meet anyway, driven by the same compulsion that had led me to Presidio Junction in the first place. We arranged to meet at the Sage Brush Cafe in Alpine the next morning. After I hung up, I checked my blog's message logs. No record of any communication from Alice Pryor or anyone else at the Texas Department of Transportation. But there was something else in my blog's analytics that made my skin crawl. My posts about the phantom train were being read. A lot. But the traffic wasn't coming from normal sources, search engines, social media referrals, direct links from other sites. According to the server logs, the traffic was coming from IP addresses that didn't exist. Blocks of numbers that fell outside the standard ranges assigned to internet service providers. Ghost traffic from ghost readers. The most disturbing detail was in the geographic data. My posts were being accessed from locations along the abandoned Burlington Northern Line. Presidio Junction, Valentine, Van Horn, places where the infrastructure to support internet access had been removed decades ago, as if the phantom train had somehow found a way online. I was still processing this information when my computer chimed with a new email notification. The sender was listed as Westbound Evening Service, and the subject line was simply Boarding Pass. The email contained a single attachment, a PDF that looked like a vintage train ticket, complete with ornate borders and old-fashioned typography. My name was printed in the passenger field. The departure time was listed as 11:47 p.m. The destination was blank. At the bottom of the ticket, in small print, was a message. Thank you for choosing the westbound evening service. Please arrive at the platform 15 minutes before departure. Baggage restrictions apply, personal effects only. One-way tickets cannot be exchanged or refunded. I tried to trace the email's origin, but the headers led nowhere. A chain of servers that didn't exist, routing through IP addresses assigned to telecommunications companies that had gone out of business in the 1980s. The phantom train had sent me a boarding pass through the ghost of the internet itself. My meeting with Alice Pryor is in 6 hours. I've been up all night, documenting everything, creating redundant backups of my research, uploading copies to cloud storage services and anonymous file-sharing sites. If something happens to me, if I disappear like my grandfather and the others, at least there will be a record. But there's one more thing. Something I discovered just an hour ago that's kept me awake, staring at my computer screen in the pre-dawn darkness. My grandfather's blog, the one I thought had ended with his disappearance in 1987, is still active. Still posting. The most recent entry was published at 11:47 p.m. last night, exactly when all those forum posts were timestamped. The title was Coordinates for the New Conductor, and the coordinates matched the ones from the railroadmysteries.net forum post. He's been trying to guide me to Presidio Junction all along. The question is, am I walking into a rescue or a trap? The railway spike on my nightstand started pulsing faster as I typed that last sentence. Outside my window, I can hear something that might be wind through power lines, or might be the distant sound of a train whistle carrying across 40 miles of empty desert. In 12 hours, I'll be at the coordinates my grandfather left for me. I just pray I'll still be myself when I get there. Comments 0, share archive. Posted by Colton Gray, March 22nd, 2025, 6:33 a.m. I'm writing this in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Marathon, Texas, my hands still shaking from what happened at Presidio Junction 6 hours ago. The fluorescent lights above my rental car keep flickering in a pattern that reminds me too much of the phantom train's headlamp, so I've moved to a booth inside where the steady hum of the coffee maker drowns out the ringing in my ears. Chase Morgan is asleep in the passenger seat of his patrol car outside, exhausted from a night that aged us both by decades. Alice Pryor drove back to Austin 20 minutes ago, claiming she needed to file an immediate report with her superiors. She wouldn't tell us what kind of report or which superiors, but the way she kept checking her phone and muttering about containment protocols made it clear this wasn't standard DOT business. I need to document what happened while it's still fresh in my memory, before my rational mind starts editing the impossible parts. Because what we witnessed at those coordinates defied every law of physics, every assumption about reality, every comfortable lie we tell ourselves about the nature of time and death. The meeting with Alice at the Sagebrush Cafe had been strange from the start. She looked exactly like what central casting would order for a government bureaucrat, mid-30s, sensible clothes, that particular kind of attractiveness that comes from always being the smartest person in the room. But her eyes were wrong. Too alert, too focused, scanning the cafe like she was cataloging every exit and potential threat. "Your grandfather was quite the researcher," she said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Thomas Gray, retired Southern Pacific conductor, born 1949. Disappeared March 15, 1987, while investigating reports of unauthorized rail activity along the Presidio-Valentine corridor. The folder contained documents I'd never seen: incident reports, witness statements, photographs of the search efforts. Official papers with DOT headers and federal case numbers that suggested my grandfather's disappearance had been far more significant than the local newspapers had reported. "These weren't in any public archives," I said. "Some things are too dangerous for public consumption." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Your grandfather wasn't the first railroad employee to go missing along that line. Since 1892, we've documented 37 disappearances, all involving people with direct connections to railroad operations. Engineers, conductors, signal operators, track maintenance crews. Always the same pattern: they report anomalous activity, begin investigating, then vanish without a trace." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the pattern's accelerating. Historically, the disappearances occurred in roughly 40-year cycles. But something changed in 2003 when the internet became widespread. Now we're seeing related incidents every few years, always connected to online research into the phantom train phenomenon." She opened her tablet and pulled up the railroadmysteries.net forum I'd discovered. But this wasn't the version I'd seen. This one had additional threads, private messages between users, administrative notes that revealed the true scope of the phenomenon. "Tigray 1949 isn't your grandfather," she said. "Or rather, it isn't only your grandfather. That account is shared by something that calls itself the Westbound Evening Service Management. Multiple entities posting through the same username, all claiming to be deceased railroad employees from different time periods." The tablet screen showed conversation logs spanning years, discussions between the dead about operational requirements, crew rotations, and something they called passenger acquisition protocols. My grandfather's posts were just one voice in a chorus of the vanished, all working together to maintain whatever the phantom train really was. "What do they want with me?" "Fresh crew. The phantom train exists in a state of temporal flux. Its original crew ages out of existence every few decades and needs replacement. Your grandfather was recruited in 1987. Now it's your turn." That's when Chase Morgan walked into the cafe, his deputy's uniform wrinkled, and his face carrying the weight of someone who'd been losing sleep over impossible things. "Ms. Pryor," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I hope you've got better explanations than the ones you gave me over the phone, because I've got livestock dying of fright 3 counties over, seismic equipment picking up sounds that register as moving trains on abandoned tracks, and EMT crews reporting compass needles spinning like pinwheels whenever they get within 10 miles of Presidio Junction." Alice closed her tablet. "Deputy Morgan, Mr. Gray, I think it's time you both saw what we're really dealing with. The drive to Presidio Junction took 2 hours through desert that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon in every direction. Alice followed us in a black SUV loaded with equipment I didn't recognize. Electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, something that looked like a Geiger counter but clicked in rhythmic patterns instead of random static. Chase had been reluctant to get involved, but something about the whole situation had hooked him. "My grandfather was a deputy here in the 80s, he explained as we drove. "He investigated your grandfather's disappearance, filed reports that got buried so deep even the county archives don't have copies. Before he died, he told me stories about that investigation that he made me promise never to repeat. Said there were things in those desert nights that would break people's minds if they got out." We reached the coordinates at 11:30 p.m., parking our vehicles in a rough circle around the ruins of the old switching station. The abandoned platform looked exactly like it had in Naomi's photographs, but something was different. The air itself felt thicker, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl and my teeth ache. Alice began setting up her equipment while Chase and I explored the platform with flashlights. The railway ties were intact, despite decades of neglect, and the steel rails gleamed as if they'd been polished recently. When I knelt to examine them more closely, the metal was warm to the touch. Temperature's rising, Alice called out, checking her instruments. Electromagnetic readings are off the charts, and we're getting some kind of temporal distortion. My atomic clock just gained 4 minutes in the last 30 seconds. That's when we heard it. The whistle started as a distant note, so faint it might have been wind through the desert sage. But it grew stronger, clearer, accompanied by the rhythmic chuffing of a steam engine that was somehow both far away and impossibly close. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once, as if the entire desert had become a resonating chamber for something approaching from outside normal space. Chase grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm not sure what we've got. Some kind of acoustic phenomenon at the old Presidio Junction. Requesting backup, and maybe someone from the University Geology Department." The radio crackled with static, then began broadcasting in a voice none of us recognized. "Westbound evening service now approaching Platform 1. All aboard for Valentine, Van Horn, and points beyond. Please have your tickets ready for collection." The announcement repeated 3 times, each iteration clearer than the last, before the radio fell silent. That's when time stopped making sense. According to my watch, the next sequence of events lasted exactly 5 minutes. According to Chase's patrol car chronometer, it was 3 hours and 17 minutes. Alice's atomic clock registered negative time, as if we'd somehow moved backward through the night. But I remember every impossible second. The phantom train materialized from the darkness like a photograph developing in reverse. First the headlamp, a pale yellow glow that cast no shadows but illuminated everything with sickly clarity. Then the cowcatcher, ornate and gleaming despite decades of rust that should have consumed it. The engine followed, a massive steam locomotive from the 1940s that moved without making contact with the rails, hovering 3 inches above the tracks while its wheels spun in empty air. Behind the engine came passenger cars that stretched back into the darkness, their windows glowing with warm light that revealed silhouettes of travelers from different eras. I could see men in work clothes and women in vintage dresses, children pressing their faces against the glass, all watching us with expressions of infinite sadness and patient expectation. The train slowed as it approached the platform, its whistle now so loud it seemed to come from inside our skulls. Steam hissed from valves that shouldn't have existed, and I could smell coal smoke and hot metal and something else, something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in a closed room. Chase had drawn his service weapon, though what he planned to shoot at a ghost train was unclear. Alice was frantically taking readings, her equipment screaming alarms that registered on frequencies human ears shouldn't be able to hear. And I was walking toward the train. I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was standing frozen with terror beside Chase. The next I was approaching the passenger car steps, while something that might have been my grandfather's voice called my name from inside the locomotive. "Colton, don't!" Chase lunged forward, grabbing my arm and pulling me back just as the train's conductor stepped onto the platform. He was tall and thin, dressed in a uniform that had been pressed and cleaned sometime in the 1950s, but now hung on his frame like a burial shroud. His face was my grandfather's face, but wrong, too pale, too angular, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Hello, Colton," he said in my grandfather's voice. "I've been waiting for you." "You're dead," I whispered. Death is a relative concept on the westbound evening service. We prefer to think of ourselves as permanently employed. He smiled with too many teeth. "The management position is ready for you. Good benefits, excellent job security, and you'll never want for anything again." Chase stepped between us, his gun trained on the phantom conductor. "He's not going anywhere." The conductor looked at Chase with something that might have been pity. "Deputy Morgan, your grandfather said the same thing, back in '87. He changed his mind eventually. They all do. My grandfather never. Check your family records, Deputy. Check them carefully. The Morgan family has been providing services to the westbound evening for 3 generations. Your time will come too, eventually." The whistle blew again, and passengers began disembarking from the cars behind the conductor. Men and women in clothes from different decades, all sharing that same pale, angular look, all moving with the patient certainty of people who had nowhere else to be. I recognized some of them from the historical photographs in Naomi's collection. Railroad employees who had vanished over the years, now part of the Phantom train's eternal crew. "Last call for boarding," the conductor announced. "The westbound evening service maintains a strict schedule." That's when Alice's equipment finally overloaded. Every device she'd brought exploded in showers of sparks and electronic screaming. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out Chase's radio, my phone, the electronics in both vehicles. In the sudden silence that followed, the phantom train began to fade. Until next time, Colton, my grandfather's voice called as the locomotive dissolved back into darkness. The position remains open. We'll be in touch. The train whistle echoed once more across the desert, and then we were alone on the platform with the smell of ozone and something else. Something that reminded me of the basement of a house where someone had died and not been found for weeks. We stood there in the darkness for a long time, listening to our own breathing and the distant sound of wind through sagebrush. When Chase finally tried his radio, it was working again, but the patrol car's clock had somehow jumped forward by 3 hours. Alice was the first to speak. "We need to leave. Now. This site will be swarming with containment teams within the hour." "Containment teams?" Chase asked. "Federal assets. The kind that ask questions later and file reports that disappear into classified archives." She was already packing up the remains of her equipment. "Mr. Gray, I strongly advise you to suspend your research into this phenomenon, for your own safety. And if I don't," she looked at me with those two alert eyes, "then I suspect your blog will eventually go quiet, just like your grandfather's did, and someone else will inherit the family business." We drove back to Marathon in convoy, none of us saying much about what we'd witnessed. Alice left for Austin immediately, but not before slipping me a business card with nothing on it but a phone number and the words, "Emergency use only." Chase is still here, sleeping in his patrol car, claiming he needs to file incident reports, but really just trying to process what happened to his understanding of reality. I don't blame him. I've been sitting in this diner for 6 hours, drinking coffee and staring at my laptop screen, trying to find words for something that exists outside the normal boundaries of language. But I keep coming back to what the phantom conductor said about the Morgan family providing services for 3 generations, about positions remaining open and eternal employment, and the westbound evening service maintaining its schedule. I think I understand now why my grandfather's blog never really stopped posting, why those forum accounts remain active decades after their owners disappeared, why the phantom train needs fresh crew every few decades. It's not just a ghost story, it's a recruitment operation, and I think I just passed the first round of interviews. The railway spike in my car has been pulsing steadily since we left Presidio Junction, its rhythm matching my heartbeat. When I checked my blog analytics an hour ago, I had 17 new subscribers, all with usernames that looked like combinations of names and death dates. The phantom train is collecting an audience. Tomorrow I'm going to visit Naomi Beck and see if she's willing to share the rest of her grandfather's files. I have a feeling the real story is just beginning. But first, I need to sleep. If I can. The whistle's been getting closer all night. Comments 3 Share archive. Whistle in the dark, posted 23 minutes ago. The evening service appreciates punctual passengers. Platform maintenance completed. Next departure scheduled accordingly. Rust and Bone, posted 18 minutes ago. Welcome aboard, Mr. Gray. Your grandfather speaks highly of you. End of the line, posted 3 minutes ago. All aboard, posted by Colton Gray, March 24th, 2025, 2:14 a.m. Naomi Beck is gone. Not just missing, gone, in the way that people disappear when they've never existed at all. Her house in Valentine is empty, with a for sale sign that the realtor swears has been there for 18 months. The Valley Morning Star has no employment records for a railroad conductor named Naomi Beck. The retirement rolls at the Southern Pacific Railroad Corporation list no one by that name. According to every official database, Naomi Beck never existed. But I have her business card in my wallet, her handwriting in my notebook, and 47 photographs she gave me documenting phantom train sightings dating back to 1952. The photographs are real. I can feel the weight of the old paper stock, smell the chemicals from darkrooms that closed decades ago. Yet somehow, I'm the only person who remembers the woman who gave them to me. Alice Pryor called me 6 hours after I published my account of what happened at Presidio Junction. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. I timed it because everything about this situation has made me paranoid about the passage of time. "Mr. Gray, we need to talk." "I figured we would. Your containment teams were pretty thorough." A pause. "What containment teams?" "The ones you mentioned at the junction. The federal assets who were supposed to swarm the site within an hour." "I never said that." Her voice had changed, become more formal, more distant. "Mr. Gray, I need you to understand that the Texas Department of Transportation has no official interest in your research. Our conversation at the Sagebrush Cafe was purely informal, colleague to colleague. That's not what happened. According to my records, I've never met you in person. We've exchanged a few emails about historical rail documentation, nothing more. I would strongly advise you to remember it that way." The line went dead. I checked my email immediately. Every message from Alice Pryor had been deleted, including the ones in my trash folder. My blog's contact form showed no record of her inquiry. Even the cached versions stored on my computer's hard drive were gone, replaced by generic spam messages about pharmaceutical discounts and cryptocurrency opportunities. Someone had reached into my digital life and surgically removed every trace of Alice Pryor's official involvement. But they'd missed something. Hidden in the metadata of a photograph I'd taken at Presidio Junction was a GPS coordinate that didn't match our location. When I plugged it into Google Maps, it led to a nondescript office building in Austin with no signage, no listed tenants, and parking spaces reserved for vehicles with federal government license plates. The Temporal Anomaly Research Division doesn't officially exist. I know this because I spent 8 hours trying to find any reference to it in government databases, congressional budget reports, or academic research papers. But it's real. I have the business card Alice gave me before she drove away from Marathon, the one with nothing but a phone number and emergency use only. When I called that number yesterday, a recorded message played. "The number you have dialed is not in service. If this is a temporal displacement emergency, please hang up and dial again in 37 minutes. I hung up and waited exactly 37 minutes. The second call connected to a different recording. Temporal Anomaly Research Division, after-hours service. All agents are currently engaged in field operations. Your call is important to us. Please leave your name, location, and the nature of your temporal displacement event after the tone." I left a message. 3 hours later, Alice called me back from a number that showed up on my caller ID as restricted government use. "You shouldn't have that card," she said without preamble. "You gave it to me." "No, I didn't." According to my report, our contact at Presidio Junction was limited to routine electromagnetic readings consistent with standard geological survey protocols. Nothing anomalous was detected. That's not what happened, and you know it. What I know is that you witnessed a Class 4 temporal incursion event and survived with your sanity intact, which makes you either very lucky or very dangerous. Her voice softened slightly. "Colton, I'm going to tell you something that could get me reassigned to monitoring weather balloons in Alaska. The Phantom Train isn't just a ghost story. It's a breach in space-time that's been growing larger and more active since 1892. She arranged to meet me at a truck stop outside Odessa, choosing a location far from any railroad tracks or federal surveillance networks. When I arrived, she was waiting in a different vehicle, a beat-up Honda Civic instead of the government SUV from Presidio Junction. "We have to assume all our previous communications have been compromised," she said, sliding into the passenger seat of my rental car. "TRD operates under what we call plausible impossibility protocols. If something can't exist according to official reality, we make sure it doesn't exist in any records." She opened a tablet and showed me files that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a government database. Incident reports documenting temporal anomalies across the American Southwest. Photographs of objects and people appearing decades out of their proper time. Video footage of the Phantom Train taken with night vision equipment that revealed details invisible to the naked eye. "The train exists in a state of temporal flux," Alice explained. "It's not bound by linear time the way we are. Every passenger, every crew member, exists simultaneously across multiple decades. Your grandfather didn't disappear in 1987. He was recruited by entities that exist outside normal causality." "Recruited for what?" "Maintenance. The Phantom Train serves a function we don't fully understand, but it seems to prevent larger temporal incursions. Think of it as a pressure valve for space-time, releasing energy that would otherwise cause reality fractures on a massive scale." She showed me satellite imagery of the Presidio-Valentine corridor taken over the past 40 years. Subtle distortions in the landscape, areas where the desert seemed to shift and change between photographs taken months apart. Places where the Phantom Train's passage had left permanent alterations to the fabric of reality. "The recruitment cycles are accelerating," Alice continued. "Historically, the train needed fresh crew every 40 years. But since the internet became widespread, it's been recruiting continuously. The digital realm has given it access to potential candidates across much larger geographical areas." "Is that why Naomi Beck disappeared?" Alice's expression darkened. "Naomi Beck was never supposed to make contact with you. Her existence as a source of information about the phantom train created a paradox. She was simultaneously part of the phenomenon and outside it. The universe corrected the inconsistency by erasing her from the timeline. But I still remember her, because you've been partially recruited. The phantom train has established a connection with you that exists outside normal temporal boundaries. You're becoming unstuck from linear time, which is why you can remember people and events that have been edited out of reality. She handed me a small electronic device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a Geiger counter. This is a temporal displacement detector. If you start experiencing further timeline alterations, people disappearing from your memory, events changing when you're not looking, time moving at inconsistent rates, the device will register the distortions. What am I supposed to do with this information? Survive long enough to make a choice. The phantom train is going to keep escalating its recruitment efforts until you either join the crew or find a way to break the connection. Based on our research, most people choose to join. The alternative is having your existence slowly erased from reality until you never existed at all. Alice left me with the temporal detector and a final warning. Don't trust your memories. Don't trust your records. Don't trust anyone who claims to be helping you, including me. The phantom train has ways of manipulating reality that we're only beginning to understand. I drove back to my hotel in Midland and spent the rest of the night testing the temporal detector. It registers steady readings most of the time, but occasionally spikes into red zones that correspond with moments when I feel like I'm forgetting something important. The device registered its highest reading at 3:17 a.m., when I woke up with the absolute certainty that someone had been standing at the foot of my bed. But the room was empty, the door was still locked, and there was no evidence anyone had been there, except for the train ticket on my nightstand. It's identical to the digital version I received through email, but this one is physical. Heavy cardstock with embossed lettering and a texture that feels decades old. My name is printed in the passenger field. The departure time is listed as 11:47 p.m. tonight. The destination remains blank, but there's something new at the bottom. Transfer available to temporal research positions. Inquire with management upon boarding. The phantom train is offering me a job. The railway spike that's been following me has multiplied. There are now 3 of them arranged on my nightstand in a triangular pattern, all pulsing in unison with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. When I picked one up to examine it more closely, my temporal detector went haywire for 30 seconds. I think I understand what Alice was trying to tell me. The phantom train doesn't just recruit passengers, it recruits reality itself. Every person who gets drawn into its orbit becomes part of a larger network of temporal manipulation that spans decades and possibly centuries. Naomi Beck wasn't erased because she was a paradox. She was erased because she was trying to help me avoid recruitment, which means Alice Pryor might be next. I tried calling her emergency number an hour ago. The recording had changed. The number you have dialed has been disconnected due to temporal instability. Please consult your local reality for alternative contact methods. My blog analytics show that I now have 1,847 subscribers, all with usernames that follow the same pattern, names followed by death dates. The comment sections of my posts are filling up with messages from people claiming to be former railroad employees, all encouraging me to accept the position and join the evening service. But there's one comment that stands out from the rest, posted just 20 minutes ago by a username I recognize, nbeck1978. The photographs were real, Colton. Remember the photographs. They show you what the train really is. Don't let them erase everything. Naomi Beck is trying to communicate from whatever corner of non-existence she's been banished to. The train ticket is getting warmer as I type this. The departure time is less than 20 hours away. I need to find Chase Morgan and warn him about what Alice told me regarding his family's connection to the phantom train. If the recruitment cycle is accelerating, he might be next on the list. But first, I'm going to study every detail of Naomi's photographs. If she's right, if they show what the phantom train really is, then maybe I can find a way to break this connection before it's too late. The railway spikes just started humming. It's a sound like distant music, like a lullaby being played on instruments that don't exist. I think it's time to go. Comments 47, share archive. Tigray 1949, posted 12 minutes ago. The evening service has reserved your compartment. Management is pleased with your progress. Boarding begins in 19 hours, 23 minutes. Nbeck 1978, posted 7 minutes ago. Don't trust the photographs. Trust what the photographs don't show. Look at the shadows, Colton. Look at what's missing from the shadows. Whistle in the dark, posted 3 minutes ago. All temporal displacement inquiries should be directed to the conductor's office. We provide excellent benefits and eternal job security. Deadman switches, posted 1 minute ago. The westbound evening service now boarding at Platform Reality. Please have your existence ready for collection. Posted by Colton Gray, March 25th, 2025, 4:33 a.m. I haven't slept in 36 hours. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the phantom train's whistle growing closer, and when I open them, another piece of my reality has been edited. Chase Morgan called me at 2:47 a.m. with news that changed everything. "We found Naomi Beck's car," he said, his voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Or what's left of it." He met me at the railroad crossing 3 miles east of Valentine, where Highway 90 intersects the abandoned Burlington Northern Line. What we found there defied every law of physics and logic I thought I understood. Naomi's 1998 Toyota Camry was embedded in the crossing signal, fused with the metal and concrete as if it had been there for decades. The paint had faded to the color of old rust, the tires had rotted away to black dust, and the interior was filled with sand that had blown in through windows that no longer existed. Desert vegetation had grown through the engine compartment and out the sunroof, creating a twisted sculpture of metal and mesquite. "The highway department has no record of an accident at this location," Chase said, shining his flashlight over the wreckage. "According to their maintenance logs, this crossing signal was installed in 2019 and has never been damaged or replaced. But the car wasn't just old, it was temporally displaced. The license plate was expired, but the expiration date was wrong. Instead of showing a future year, it displayed 1987 to 2025, as if the vehicle had existed continuously across nearly 4 decades. Inside the glove compartment, preserved in a plastic evidence bag that appeared to be standard police issue from the 1990s, we found Naomi Beck's railroad employee identification card. The photograph showed a woman who looked exactly as she had when I met her 3 days ago, but the issued date was January 15th, 1952. "This doesn't make sense," Chase muttered, examining the ID card with his flashlight. "My grandfather was a deputy in 1952. He would have known every railroad employee in this county." That's when I showed him the temporal detector Alice had given me. The device was screaming with electromagnetic interference, its readings spiking into zones marked critical displacement event. "What the hell is that thing?" Chase asked. "Evidence that your family has been dealing with this phenomenon longer than you know." I opened my laptop and showed him the research I'd compiled over the past 6 hours. Using newspaper archives, police reports, and missing person databases, I'd mapped every phantom train sighting and unexplained disappearance in West Texas since 1892. The pattern was undeniable and terrifying. Every 37 years, without exception, someone connected to railroad operations would vanish during a phantom train encounter. But the cycle was accelerating. What had once been a predictable generational event was now happening with increasing frequency. Every 25 years, then every 15, then every 7. According to this data, I explained, the last major recruitment event was in 1987. That's when my grandfather disappeared. But there have been smaller incidents in 1994, 2001, 2008, 2015, and 2022. The intervals are shrinking exponentially. Chase studied the timeline I'd created, his expression growing darker with each entry. 2022, that's when my cousin Jake went missing. He was working for Union Pacific, disappeared during a night shift near the same tracks where your grandfather was last seen. The phantom train isn't just taking individuals anymore, I continued. It's building a network. Every person it recruits becomes a node in a larger temporal manipulation system. That's why Alice Pryor's records keep changing, why Naomi Beck was erased from history, why reality itself seems to be rewriting around us. The temporal detector started beeping in a rhythmic pattern that sounded almost musical. Chase grabbed my arm and pointed toward the horizon. "Do you see that?" In the distance, barely visible against the pre-dawn darkness, a faint light was moving along the abandoned rail line. Not the steady beam of a locomotive headlight, but something that pulsed and flickered like a dying star. "It's not supposed to be here for another 19 hours, I whispered. But as we watched, the light grew brighter and closer, accompanied by a sound that wasn't quite a train whistle and wasn't quite music. The temporal detector's readings spiked beyond its measurement capabilities, displaying error messages in languages I didn't recognize. Chase drew his service weapon, though I couldn't imagine what good it would do against something that existed partially outside normal space-time. "We need to get out of here," he said, but we couldn't move. Not because we were paralyzed by fear, but because time itself had become thick and viscous around us. Every step required enormous effort, like walking through invisible molasses. The phantom train's approach was distorting the flow of temporal reality, creating a bubble where cause and effect operated according to different rules. The light resolved into something that hurt to look at directly, a locomotive that seemed to be constructed from crystallized starlight and shadow, pulling cars that flickered between different time periods with each pulse of its otherworldly illumination. I caught glimpses of ornate Victorian passenger compartments, utilitarian freight cars from the Great Depression, and sleek modern designs that looked decades ahead of current technology. But it was the passengers that made my blood freeze. Silhouettes pressed against windows that sometimes existed and sometimes didn't, figures in clothing from different eras all riding together in impossible temporal harmony. I recognized some of the faces from the photographs Naomi had given me, railroad workers who had disappeared over the past century, now serving as crew and passengers on a train that existed outside linear time. And in the locomotive's cab, barely visible through the ethereal glow, I saw a figure in a conductor's uniform waving at me with desperate urgency. My grandfather. He was trying to tell me something, pointing frantically toward the rear of the train where a single car sat separate from the others. Unlike the rest of the phantom locomotive, this car appeared solid and real, a modern passenger coach with temporal research division, stenciled on its side in government standard font. Alice Pryor's containment unit. The federal assets she'd mentioned were already aboard the phantom train, not trying to stop it, but working with it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Temporal Anomaly Research Division wasn't studying the phantom train phenomenon. They were managing it. Alice hadn't been trying to help me escape recruitment. She'd been facilitating it, ensuring the process went smoothly and officially. Every conversation we'd had, every piece of information she'd shared, had been designed to draw me deeper into the phantom train's sphere of influence. The temporal detector she'd given me wasn't a warning system. It was a homing beacon, marking my location for the recruitment protocols. I yanked the device from my pocket and threw it as far as I could into the desert. It exploded on impact with a flash of blue-white light that briefly illuminated the entire landscape in unnatural clarity. For just a moment, I could see everything. The true scope of the phantom train network stretching across West Texas like a vast web of temporal manipulation, with railroad tracks that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously, connecting past and present in ways that defied comprehension. And I could see the other recruiters, people like Alice Pryor stationed at temporal anomaly sites across the country, identifying potential candidates and guiding them through the selection process. The phantom train wasn't just a local legend. It was part of a national infrastructure for managing space-time stability, recruiting new personnel from the civilian population whenever its operations required expansion. The temporal research car detached from the phantom train and began moving toward us on tracks that materialized from pure possibility. Chase tried to run, but his movements were still locked in temporal slow motion. I could only watch as Alice Pryor stepped down from the research car, now wearing the same style of conductor's uniform I'd seen on my grandfather. "You're ahead of schedule, Colton," she said, her voice echoing with harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple time periods simultaneously. "The evening service doesn't depart for another 18 hours. "You were never trying to help me," I said. "I was helping you understand your role in the larger system." The phantom train serves a critical function in maintaining temporal stability across the North American continent. Without our intervention, reality fractures would cascade into full timeline collapse within a matter of decades. She gestured toward the phantom locomotive, which had stopped about 50 yards away and was now pulsing with gentle, almost hypnotic light patterns. "Your grandfather was recruited during the 1987 expansion event. He's been serving as a temporal field coordinator for 38 years, helping to manage the recruitment and training of new personnel." "What about Naomi Beck?" Alice's expression darkened. Ms. Beck was a temporal artifact who gained unauthorized access to classified historical records. Her existence created paradoxes that threatened the integrity of the recruitment process. The universe self-corrected by editing her out of the timeline, but not before she contaminated your perception with contradictory information. Chase had managed to reach his patrol car and was frantically radioing for backup, but I could hear from his conversation that dispatch was receiving his transmissions as routine traffic stop requests. The phantom train's reality distortion field was preventing outside interference. You have two choices, Alice continued. Accept immediate recruitment and join your grandfather in the Temporal Research Division, or resist and face systematic existence erasure like Ms. Beck. Either way, the phantom train's mission continues. I looked at the temporal research car, where I could see other figures in conductor uniforms, people who had been recruited over the decades, now serving as intermediaries between the civilian world and the phantom train's otherworldly operations. But there was something Alice hadn't accounted for: Naomi Beck's photographs. I pulled them from my jacket pocket, and immediately the phantom train's light patterns became agitated, flickering with what looked almost like alarm. Alice stepped back, her temporal harmonics destabilizing into discordant noise. "Those shouldn't exist," she said. All evidence of Ms. Beck's activities was erased from the timeline. But the photographs were more than just evidence. They were anchors, physical objects that existed independently of the temporal manipulations that had erased their creator. And looking at them now, with my perception partially unstuck from linear time, I could see what Naomi had tried to tell me in her final blog comment. The shadows in the photographs didn't match the objects casting them. The phantom train's temporal displacement created shadow patterns that revealed its true nature. Not a supernatural entity, but a piece of technology, so advanced it appeared magical to anyone operating within normal space-time constraints. "It's not a ghost train," I said, understanding flooding through me. "It's a machine. A temporal manipulation device built by someone or something with technology centuries ahead of our current capabilities." Alice's form began to flicker like a bad television signal. "That information is classified at levels that don't officially exist." "Who built it? When? Why?" "The recruitment process has been accelerated," she said, stepping back toward the temporal research car. "Immediate boarding is now mandatory." The phantom train's whistle sounded again, but this time I could hear the mechanical undertones beneath the ethereal harmonics. It wasn't calling to me. It was receiving instructions from somewhere else, somewhere further up the timeline, where the true controllers of this operation were coordinating their temporal infrastructure projects. Chase managed to break free from the time distortion and reached my position just as the phantom train began to move. "We need to go," he said, grabbing my arm. "Now." But I was already running, not toward safety but toward the temporal research car. If I was going to be recruited whether I wanted it or not, I needed to understand what I was being recruited into. Alice tried to block my path, but her temporally displaced form couldn't maintain physical coherence outside the immediate vicinity of the phantom train. I pushed through her flickering image and grabbed the handrail of the research car just as it began to accelerate. The last thing I saw before boarding was Chase's patrol car racing back toward Valentine, carrying the photographs that might be the only remaining evidence of what had really happened to us. Inside the temporal research car, I found myself face to face with my grandfather for the first time in 38 years. He looked exactly as he had in 1987, neither aged nor preserved, but somehow existing in a state of temporal suspension that made conventional concepts of aging irrelevant. "Hello, Colton," he said. "We've been waiting for you to join us." Through the windows of the research car, I could see the landscape of West Texas flowing past at impossible speeds, decades of geological change compressed into seconds of perceived time. We weren't just traveling through space, we were traveling through time itself, moving toward a destination that existed somewhere in the intersection of past and future. "Where are we going?" I asked. My grandfather smiled, but there was something desperately sad in his expression. "To meet the architects of the Phantom Train Network. They have a job offer for you." The temporal research car shuddered as it detached from the phantom locomotive and began following a different set of tracks, ones that led not across the Texas desert, but through the fundamental structure of space-time itself. I had 17 hours and 13 minutes until the scheduled departure time listed on my ticket. But according to the chronometer on the research car's control panel, I'd already been traveling for 67 years, for months, and 18 days. Time, I was beginning to understand, was much more flexible than I'd ever imagined. And the phantom train was just the beginning. Comments, 23, share archive. Chase Deputy 47, posted 2 minutes ago. Colton, if you're reading this, I made it back to Valentine. The photographs are safe. I'm taking them to someone who might be able to help. Don't trust the recruitment offer. Tigray 1949, posted 1 minute ago. The orientation process is beginning, grandson. You'll understand everything soon. The work we do here is more important than you can imagine. Enbeck 1978, posted 30 seconds ago. The shadows, Colton. Remember the shadows? They show the machine's true controllers. Look for the triangular markings in the background of photograph number 23. Temporal admin, posted 15 seconds ago. All unauthorized communications to this blog have been flagged for timeline adjustment. Standard recruitment protocols are now in effect. Posted by Colton Gray, March 26, 2025, 11:47 p.m. The railway spikes started appearing in my apartment at 3:33 a.m. I woke to the sound of metal striking with rhythmic, deliberate percussion that seemed to emanate from inside the walls themselves. When I turned on the lights, I found a rusted railroad spike driven halfway through my bedroom floor, its iron head still warm to the touch despite the metal's obvious age. By morning, there were 17 more. They appeared in impossible places, embedded in the refrigerator door, driven through the bathroom mirror without shattering the glass, piercing the center of my laptop screen, while somehow leaving the device functional. Each spike bore the same markings I'd photographed at the abandoned crossing, manufacturer stamps from railroad companies that had been defunct for over a century, mixed with symbols that didn't correspond to any industrial notation system I could identify. The temporal detector Alice had given me was screaming continuous warnings, but its readings had become incomprehensible. Instead of displaying electromagnetic field measurements, the screen showed what looked like train departure schedules in multiple languages, some of which appeared to be written in scripts that hadn't been invented yet. Emergency alert, 4:15 a.m. Central Time. All residents of Presidio County are advised to evacuate the area immediately due to a hazardous gas leak from an underground storage facility. This is not a drill. Proceed to designated evacuation centers in Fort Stockton or Midland. Do not attempt to investigate the source of any unusual sounds or lights. Repeat, evacuation is mandatory and immediate. But there was no gas leak. I could smell it in the air, the metallic tang of ozone and the sweet scent of prairie grass that came with temporal displacement events. The government was clearing civilians from the area to prevent witnesses to what was about to happen. Chase Morgan arrived at my apartment building just as the evacuation sirens began wailing across Valentine. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days, and his uniform was wrinkled in a way that suggested he'd been living in his patrol car. "You need to come with me," he said without preamble. "Right now." "Where?" "Away from here. As far away as we can get before nightfall." I showed him the railway spikes embedded throughout my apartment. Chase examined them with the focused intensity of someone who was trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about reality. "These weren't here yesterday," I said. "I know. The same thing happened to my cousin Jake in 2022, right before he disappeared. My grandfather's old case files describe identical phenomena in 1987, 1952, and 1915. The phantom train doesn't just recruit people, it marks them first." He pulled out a manila folder thick with photocopied documents and faded photographs. I spent the night going through 3 generations of family records. Every Morgan who's worked in law enforcement in this county has dealt with phantom train incidents, and we've all been instructed to suppress the reports and facilitate the cover-ups. The documents told a story that made my blood run cold. The Morgan family hadn't just been witnesses to the phantom train's activities. They'd been generational collaborators, helping to identify and isolate recruitment targets while maintaining the official fiction that nothing supernatural was occurring. "My great-grandfather was the deputy who filed the original missing person report for your great-great-grandfather in 1915, Chase continued. "My grandfather handled your grandfather's disappearance in 1987. And now I'm supposed to manage your recruitment in 2025. "Supposed to?" Chase's expression hardened. "Every deputy in my family line received the same briefing when they took office. We're told that the phantom train serves a vital national security function, that the people it recruits are volunteering for classified temporal research projects, and that our job is to ensure the process goes smoothly while maintaining public ignorance of the operation." He showed me a letter written on official Department of Homeland Security letterhead, dated 3 days after he'd been sworn in as deputy sheriff. The document authorized him to facilitate temporal anomaly management protocols and provided contact information for Alice Pryor's federal task force. "But Jake wasn't a volunteer," Chase said. "He was terrified. Called me the night before he disappeared, saying he could hear voices in the train whistles and that railway spikes were appearing in his house. I told him it was stress from the night shift work. I followed protocol and referred his case to the federal task force for counseling and support. What happened to him? Officially, he resigned from Union Pacific and moved to Oregon to work for a logging company. The federal task force provided employment records, forwarding addresses, even fake social media posts to support the cover story. But I tried to contact him last month for his birthday, and the phone number goes to a disconnected voicemail that plays train sounds instead of a greeting. Chase opened another file, this one containing photographs that made my hands shake. They showed the interior of what appeared to be a passenger train car, but the perspective was wrong. The ceiling was too high, the windows were too wide, and the seats seemed to extend infinitely into the distance. In several of the photographs, I could make out human figures, but they appeared translucent, as if they were only partially present in normal space-time. These were found in my grandfather's personal effects after he died, Chase explained, hidden in a safety deposit box along with instructions to show them to me if the phantom train ever came for a Gray family member. One photograph showed a figure I recognized despite the temporal distortion effects that made his features difficult to focus on. My grandfather, wearing a conductor's uniform and standing beside what looked like a control panel covered in instruments that belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a railroad locomotive. "He's still alive," I whispered. "Alive isn't the right word. The people recruited by the phantom train exist in a state of temporal suspension. They're conscious and capable of performing their assigned duties, but they're locked into a single moment of space-time that repeats indefinitely. It's not life as we understand it. It's more like an eternal instant of existence." The emergency sirens were getting louder, and through my apartment window I could see military vehicles moving through Valentine's empty streets. The evacuation was proceeding faster than any legitimate gas leak response would require, which meant the federal task force was accelerating their timeline. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If your family has been helping them for generations, why break the pattern now?" Chase was quiet for a long moment, staring at a photograph of his cousin Jake taken just days before his disappearance. Because I looked into Jake's eyes the night he called me, and I saw someone who was being hunted. The phantom train doesn't recruit volunteers, it harvests people. And every generation of my family has been complicit in feeding it victims. So what do? We run, get as far away from the railroad tracks as possible, and hope the phantom train's influence doesn't extend beyond its traditional operational area. But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his expression. The railway spikes embedded in my apartment suggested that the phantom train's reach was expanding, that it could manifest its recruitment markers anywhere within its target zone. Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors was growing closer. Through the window, I could see military aircraft circling the area in patterns that seemed designed to monitor ground movement rather than provide emergency evacuation support. They're not just clearing civilians, I realized. They're creating a containment perimeter. Chase checked his radio and swore under his breath. "All emergency services have been ordered to report to a staging area 30 miles east of here. Anyone who refuses to comply will be detained for public safety reasons." The temporal detector started beeping in a new pattern, 3 short pulses followed by 1 long tone, repeating endlessly. I'd heard that rhythm before, during my research into historical railroad operations. It was the standard signal used by 19th century conductors to indicate all aboard. "It's calling to me," I said, and immediately regretted speaking the words aloud. But it was true. Somewhere beneath the conscious level of my thoughts, I could feel a pull toward the abandoned railway line where the phantom train was scheduled to arrive. Not a compulsion exactly, but something more subtle, a growing sense that I belonged elsewhere, that my current existence was somehow incomplete. Chase grabbed my shoulders and forced me to meet his eyes. "Fight it. Whatever you're feeling, it's artificial. The phantom train uses some kind of psychic influence to make recruitment feel voluntary." "How do you know?" "Because I'm feeling it too. Every male in my family line experiences the calling during phantom train recruitment events. We're psychologically conditioned to guide targets toward acceptance while believing we're acting according to our own moral judgment." The realization hit me like physical pain. "You're not trying to save me. You're programmed to help me rationalize boarding the phantom train." "No," Chase said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm fighting the conditioning. That's why I brought my grandfather's files, why I'm trying to warn you instead of following the established protocol." But even as he spoke, I could see the internal conflict playing out across his features. Part of him genuinely wanted to help me escape, but another part, the part that had been shaped by generations of collaboration with the phantom train operation, was working to ensure I fulfilled my role in the recruitment process. The helicopter rotors were directly overhead now, and the sound of military vehicles was getting closer. Through the temporal detector's distorted display, I could see that we had less than 2 hours before the Phantom train's scheduled arrival. "We need to leave," Chase said. "Now." But when I tried to move toward the door, my legs felt impossibly heavy. The railway spikes embedded throughout my apartment were glowing with faint phosphorescence, and the air itself seemed to thicken with each breath. "I can't," I gasped. "Something's holding me here." Chase tried to help me toward the exit, but his movements were becoming sluggish as well. The Phantom train's influence was intensifying as its arrival time approached, creating a temporal field that made physical resistance increasingly difficult. Through the window, I could see Alice Pryor's government sedan pulling into the apartment complex parking lot. She stepped out wearing the same Federal Task Force uniform I'd seen her in before, but now I could make out additional details that had been obscured by perception filters during our previous encounters. Her badge wasn't from the Department of Transportation. It bore the seal of an agency I didn't recognize, something that looked like a combination of NASA, the Department of Energy, and symbols that suggested authority over temporal phenomena. "She's not DOT," I said. "She's something else entirely." Chase looked out the window, and his expression went blank. "Temporal Anomaly Research Division. My grandfather's files mention them. They're the real power behind the Phantom train operation." Alice was walking toward the building entrance, but her movements weren't quite right. She seemed to be walking through time as well as space, her form flickering between different moments as if she existed across multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously. The railway spikes in my apartment began vibrating in unison, creating a low harmonic that seemed to resonate in my bones. Through the temporal detector's screen, I could see countdown numbers decreasing rapidly, not just hours and minutes, but years and decades, as if time itself was accelerating toward some predetermined convergence point. "The calling is getting stronger," I admitted. Chase nodded, his own resistance visibly weakening. "It's designed to feel like destiny. Like everything that's happened has been leading to this moment." Maybe it has. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and I realized with growing horror that part of me was beginning to believe them. The Phantom train's psychological conditioning was subtle but powerful, rewriting my sense of agency, so that recruitment felt like a conscious choice rather than inevitable capture. Alice Pryor reached my apartment door and knocked with the precise rhythm of the Phantom train's whistle. 3 short, 1 long, repeat. The sound seemed to come from inside my head as much as from the hallway. "Colton Gray," she called through the door. "It's time for your departure interview." I looked at Chase, who was struggling against his own conditioned responses. "What happens if I refuse?" According to my grandfather's files, refusal isn't actually possible once the calling reaches critical intensity. The Phantom train's recruitment protocols account for resistance by gradually eliminating the psychological foundations that make refusal feel meaningful. Alice knocked again, and this time the railway spikes in my apartment began pulling themselves free from their embedded positions, floating through the air toward the door as if drawn by magnetic attraction. "The choice isn't whether to board the Phantom train," Chase continued, his voice taking on the flat, recited quality of someone repeating programmed instructions. "The choice is whether to board willingly or be compelled." I could feel my own resistance crumbling as the temporal field intensified. The apartment around me was beginning to flicker between different time periods, sometimes showing my current furnishings, sometimes appearing as it had when built in the 1960s, sometimes displaying configurations that suggested future occupants I would never meet. Through the window, I could see the Phantom train's light appearing on the horizon, still hours ahead of schedule, but growing brighter with each passing moment. My grandfather was calling to me through the temporal distortion, his voice carried on harmonics that existed outside normal acoustic properties. "Come home, Colton. Your family is waiting." Alice's voice joined the calling from outside my door. "The orientation process is beginning. Resistance will only make the transition more difficult." And underneath both voices, barely audible but growing stronger, I could hear the Phantom train's whistle playing a melody that sounded almost like my name. The railway spikes were orbiting the apartment now, tracing complex patterns that seemed to map the interior of a train car. Where they passed, the walls flickered and showed glimpses of the temporal research car I'd seen in my grandfather's photographs. I had perhaps 30 minutes before the calling reached intensity levels that would make rational thought impossible. Time enough to make one last blog post. Time enough to document what was happening to me before the Phantom train's recruitment protocols consumed my capacity for independent communication. I sat down at my laptop, the screen displaying departure schedules in languages that shouldn't exist, and began typing the words that might be my final message to the world outside the phantom train's influence. Outside my door, Alice Pryor continued knocking with mechanical persistence, each impact synchronized with the rhythm of wheels on rails. The calling was almost overwhelming now, but I still had enough of myself left to resist. For now. Comments 47, share archive. Chase Deputy 47, posted 1 minute ago. The evacuation is complete. All civilians have been moved to safety zones. Federal task force is moving to final phase protocols. Tigray 1949, posted 45 seconds ago. The temporal research car is ready for your arrival, grandson. The work we do here serves purposes beyond individual understanding. Alice TRD_official, posted 30 seconds ago. Departure interview commencing in 15 minutes. All recruitment protocols are functioning within acceptable parameters. Temporal admin, posted 15 seconds ago. Blog access will be transferred to recruitment management systems upon subject compliance. Historical documentation protocols require minimal disruption to established patterns. Unknown_user_1987, posted 5 seconds ago. The shadows in photograph number 23. Look at the shadows, Colton. They show who really controls the phantom train. It's not what you think it is. Posted by Colton Gray, March 27th, 2025, 2:14 a.m. The conductor's uniform appeared in my closet while I was writing my last post. I discovered it when I went to grab a jacket. There it was, hanging between my Texas Tech sweatshirt and my grandfather's old denim shirt that I'd inherited after his disappearance. The fabric looked impossibly fresh despite its obvious age, with brass buttons that gleamed as if they'd been polished moments before. The name tag read C. Gray, in letters that seemed to shift between fonts when I wasn't looking directly at them. The uniform fit perfectly. I know because I tried it on. I couldn't help myself. The moment I touched the fabric, every rational thought in my head went silent, replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to see myself wearing the clothes of a phantom train conductor. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw my grandfather's face staring back at me for just a moment before the reflection snapped back to my own features. But the expression remained his. That distant, knowing look he'd worn in the few photographs we had from before his disappearance. The look of someone who understood truths that couldn't be shared with the living world. Emergency alert, 2:47 a.m. Central Time. Final evacuation notice. All remaining personnel in Presidio County must report to designated extraction points immediately. Temporal anomaly event imminent. This is not a drill. Anyone who fails to comply with evacuation orders will be considered lost and presumed deceased for official records. The alert broadcasts simultaneously across every electronic device in my apartment. Phone, laptop, the old radio in my kitchen, even the digital clock on my microwave. But the voice delivering the message wasn't the standard emergency broadcast announcer. It was Alice Pryor, and she was speaking with the authority of someone who no longer felt the need to maintain pretenses about her real role in the phantom train operation. Through my window, I could see military vehicles establishing a perimeter around the entire town of Valentine. Searchlights swept the empty streets in patterns that seemed designed to track movement rather than provide illumination. In the distance, the abandoned railway line glowed with phosphorescent light that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The phantom train was coming early. Chase Morgan's patrol car pulled up outside my building just as I was taking off the conductor's uniform. He ran up the stairs 2 at a time, and when he reached my door, I could see that he was barely maintaining control over his own actions. "The conditioning is breaking down," he said without greeting. "I can feel myself following the programmed responses, but I'm still conscious enough to recognize what's happening. How long do we have? Maybe an hour before I lose the ability to act against the recruitment protocols. My family's psychological conditioning includes fail-safes that activate when temporal anomaly events reach critical intensity." He showed me his grandfather's final file, documents that had been sealed until tonight, when some automated system had apparently unlocked them in preparation for the phantom train's arrival. The file contained photographs that revealed the true scope of the operation. The phantom train wasn't just a single locomotive. It was a massive temporal complex that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously. The train that people saw was merely the visible interface, the part that manifested in normal space-time long enough to facilitate recruitment. "Look at this," Chase said, pointing to a schematic that showed the phantom train's internal structure. "It's not a train at all. It's some kind of temporal research facility that's been disguised to look like historical railroad equipment. The schematic revealed multiple levels, each operating in different time periods. The conductor's car where my grandfather worked existed in 1987, while other sections operated in 1952, 1915, and dates that extended both further into the past and decades into the future. The entire structure was held together by technology that seemed to blend advanced physics with symbols that looked more like occult notation than scientific equations. Who built this thing? That's the question my grandfather spent his career trying to answer. According to his research, the Phantom train first appeared in 1878, just after the last of the Apache resistance was suppressed in this region. But the technology it uses didn't exist in the 19th century. Didn't exist in the 20th century either. Chase opened another file, this one containing testimonies from Phantom train conductors who had somehow managed to send messages back to the normal timeline. The accounts were fragmentary and often contradictory, but they painted a picture of an organization that operated outside conventional understanding of time and space. The conductors don't age, Chase read from one testimony. We experience the passage of time, but our bodies remain locked at the moment of recruitment. We perform our duties across multiple time periods simultaneously, maintaining the stability of the temporal corridor that allows the Phantom train to continue its mission. What mission? That's where the testimonies become unclear. Some conductors describe themselves as researchers, studying temporal phenomena for scientific purposes. Others claim they're prisoners, forced to maintain a system they don't understand. A few suggest they're actually preventing something worse, that the Phantom train exists to contain temporal anomalies that would otherwise destabilize reality itself. The conductor's uniform in my closet began glowing with the same phosphorescent light I'd seen on the railway tracks. When I looked at it directly, I could see patterns moving through the fabric, equations and diagrams that seemed to describe the mathematical relationships between different time periods. It's calling to me more strongly now, I admitted. Chase nodded. The psychological conditioning accelerates as the recruitment event approaches. Within the next 30 minutes, you'll start experiencing temporal displacement symptoms, moments where you exist partially in the Phantom train's time stream before the actual boarding process begins. As if summoned by his words, the apartment around me flickered. For just an instant, I was standing in what looked like the interior of a train car, with my grandfather working at a control panel covered in instruments that definitely didn't belong to any railroad company from Earth's history. Colton, his voice reached me across the temporal displacement. The orientation process is beginning. Don't fight the transition, it only makes the psychological integration more difficult. The vision lasted only seconds, but when normal reality reasserted itself, I found that I was wearing the conductor's uniform again without any memory of putting it on. Chase was staring at me with an expression that mixed fear with the programmed acceptance his family had been conditioned to display during recruitment events. How do I look? I asked and immediately regretted the question. Like you belong on the Phantom train, he answered, and his tone suggested he genuinely meant it as a positive observation. The temporal detector was going haywire now, its screen displaying readouts that seemed to show my apartment existing in multiple time periods simultaneously. According to its measurements, I was currently experiencing temporal coordinates for 2025, 1987, 1952, and what appeared to be sometime in the early 22nd century. Alice Pryor's voice came through every speaker in the building simultaneously. Colton Gray, report to the railway crossing for final orientation. The Phantom train is now operating on accelerated scheduling to accommodate temporal instabilities in the local space-time matrix. Through my window, I could see the Phantom train's light approaching along tracks that hadn't existed moments before. The locomotive was larger than any historical train I'd ever seen, and its cars seemed to extend infinitely into the distance. As it drew closer, I could make out figures moving behind windows that showed interior scenes from different time periods. My grandfather in 1987, other conductors from decades past, and people I didn't recognize who might be working in time periods that hadn't happened yet. This is it, Chase said. Once you leave this apartment, the recruitment process becomes irreversible. What if I refuse? What if I just stay here? Chase consulted his grandfather's files one final time. According to the historical records, refusal results in temporal displacement without the protective conditioning that conscious recruitment provides. You'd be pulled into the Phantom train's time stream, but without the psychological preparation, that allows conductors to maintain their sanity across multiple temporal coordinates. So my choices are to board the phantom train willingly or be driven insane and board it anyway. Those appear to be the only options, yes. The phantom train's whistle echoed across Valentine, and this time the sound carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in my bones. I could feel my consciousness beginning to stretch across multiple time periods, experiencing fragments of conversations with my grandfather, memories of railway work I'd never actually performed, and knowledge of temporal physics that I shouldn't possess. "The calling is almost complete," Chase observed. "Your psychological integration with the phantom train's operational parameters is proceeding within acceptable ranges." His speech patterns were becoming more formal, more clinical. The conditioning his family had carried for generations was taking control as the recruitment event reached its climax. "Chase," I said, trying to reach whatever part of him was still fighting the programming. "Remember your cousin, Jake? Remember what you told me about wanting to break the pattern?" For a moment, his expression cleared. "Jake," he whispered. "They took Jake, and I helped them do it." But the clarity didn't last. Within seconds, his features settled back into the calm, accepting expression of someone following predetermined behavioral protocols. "Your resistance to the recruitment process is admirable," he said in a tone that suggested he was reading from an internal script. "However, continued resistance will only delay your integration into the phantom train's operational structure. The temporal research being conducted serves purposes that extend beyond individual preference." I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw that the conductor's uniform was changing. The brass buttons now displayed symbols that looked like a combination of railroad insignia and mathematical equations. The fabric itself seemed to be alive, shifting patterns that mapped temporal relationships I was beginning to understand despite never having studied advanced physics. The phantom train was now visible through my window, not approaching along distant tracks, but occupying the same space as my apartment building. I could see through the walls into train cars that extended in directions that didn't correspond to normal three-dimensional space. My grandfather was standing in the nearest car, wearing the same conductor's uniform I now found myself dressed in. He was working at a control panel, but he looked up and made eye contact with me across the temporal displacement that separated us. "The research we conduct here serves to maintain the stability of the local space-time matrix." His voice reached me through dimensions that shouldn't exist. "Without the phantom train's intervention, the temporal anomalies generated by human technological development would eventually destabilize reality itself." "What kind of research?" "Temporal archaeology. We study the consequences of historical events across multiple timeline branches, identifying points where reality becomes unstable and implementing corrective measures. The phantom train exists outside normal time specifically to prevent paradoxes that would otherwise unravel the causal structure of existence." Through the apartment walls, I could see other phantom train conductors at work, people from different time periods, all wearing variants of the same uniform I now wore, all focused on tasks that involved manipulating temporal phenomena with technology that seemed to blend science with something that looked suspiciously like magic. But why the secrecy? Why the recruitment deception? Because the knowledge required to perform temporal research safely is incompatible with existence in normal space-time. Conductors must be psychologically conditioned to operate across multiple time periods simultaneously without losing their sanity or their sense of individual identity. The apartment was fading around me now, replaced by the interior of a phantom train car that seemed larger than any physical space should be. Chase was still present, but he appeared to be existing in multiple time periods simultaneously, sometimes as the deputy sheriff I'd been talking to, sometimes as a younger version helping with previous recruitment events, sometimes as an older man performing duties I didn't recognize. "The transition process is nearly complete," he said in voices that came from different points in his personal timeline. "Final integration requires conscious acceptance of your role in the phantom train's operational structure." Alice Pryor materialized in the train car, not walking through a door, but simply occupying space she hadn't been in moments before. She was wearing a uniform that combined elements of her Federal Task Force outfit with conductor's insignia that marked her as senior staff. "Colton Gray," she said, consulting a clipboard that displayed information in languages I was starting to understand despite never having learned them. "Your psychological profile indicates optimal compatibility with temporal research duties. Your obsession with historical railroad mysteries provides the motivational foundation necessary for long-term engagement with phantom train operations." "How long-term?" The phantom train exists outside normal temporal flow. From your perspective, you'll experience the passage of time normally. From the perspective of the outside world, you'll perform your duties across multiple decades simultaneously, maintaining temporal stability for the entire regional space-time matrix. Through the train car windows, I could see landscapes that shifted between different time periods. Sometimes the Texas plains as they appeared in 2025, sometimes the same region during the Apache resistance of the 1870s, sometimes configurations that suggested future developments I couldn't identify. What happens if I refuse? Alice consulted her clipboard again. Refusal is not actually possible at this stage of the recruitment process. Your consciousness has already been partially integrated with the phantom train's temporal structure. The choice now is whether to complete the integration process with full psychological preparation or allow it to proceed without the protective conditioning that preserves individual identity across multiple time streams. I looked at my hands and saw that they were becoming translucent, existing simultaneously in the train car and in my apartment and in what appeared to be several other locations across different time periods. My consciousness was fragmenting across multiple temporal coordinates, experiencing conversations I'd had with my grandfather decades before my birth, research duties I was performing in time periods that hadn't happened yet, and knowledge of temporal physics that came from sources I couldn't identify. The integration process cannot be reversed, Alice continued. However, the phantom train's operational parameters include provisions for conductors to maintain contact with the normal timeline through approved communication channels. Like the blog. Exactly. Your continued documentation of phantom train activities serves important recruitment functions while allowing you to preserve aspects of your pre-integration identity. Many conductors find this continuity helpful during the psychological adjustment period. My grandfather appeared beside Alice, his form flickering between different time periods as he moved through the train car. "The work we do here has meaning, Colton," he said. "We're not prisoners, we're custodians. The phantom train's mission is to preserve the stability of time itself, preventing paradoxes and temporal anomalies that would otherwise unravel the causal structure of reality." But what about free will? What about the life I had planned? Those concepts become less relevant once you understand the true nature of time. Linear existence is an illusion. Everything that has happened or will happen exists simultaneously across the temporal matrix. The phantom train simply allows consciousness to operate at the level where this truth becomes apparent. The train car around me was expanding, revealing workstations where other conductors performed duties that seemed to involve monitoring and adjusting temporal phenomena across multiple time periods. Some were working with technology that looked like advanced physics equipment, while others performed tasks that resembled ritual magic, but apparently served the same scientific functions. "Your integration is nearly complete," Alice observed. "Final acceptance of your conductor duties will stabilize your consciousness across the temporal coordinates necessary for optimal operational effectiveness." I could feel the last remnants of my resistance crumbling as the phantom train's psychological conditioning reached critical intensity. The uniform I wore was no longer just clothing. It was becoming part of my identity, reshaping my sense of self to align with the role I was being recruited to perform. But in the final moments before complete integration, I managed to focus enough to ask one last question. What happens to the world if the phantom train stops operating? Alice and my grandfather exchanged glances that suggested they were communicating through methods that didn't require speech. The temporal anomalies generated by human technological development would cascade into paradoxes that unravel the causal structure of local spacetime, Alice finally answered. Reality itself would become unstable, with past and future events occurring simultaneously until the entire timeline collapsed into chaos. So we're not just conductors, we're holding reality together. "You're beginning to understand the true significance of the work performed here," my grandfather said with obvious pride. "The phantom train doesn't just recruit railroad enthusiasts. It selects individuals whose psychological profiles indicate they can handle the responsibility of maintaining temporal stability for entire regions of spacetime." The integration process reached completion just as I was formulating my next question. My consciousness expanded across multiple time periods simultaneously, and suddenly I could perceive the phantom train's true scope, a vast temporal research complex that extended through decades of history, staffed by conductors who worked across multiple timelines to prevent reality itself from collapsing into paradox. I was no longer just Colton Gray, railroad historian and blogger. I was Conductor C. Gray, temporal researcher and guardian of space-time stability, equipped with knowledge and responsibilities that extended far beyond anything I'd imagined during my linear existence. But part of me, the part that would continue maintaining the blog as a recruitment tool and communication channel, retained enough of my original identity to understand what had happened to me. The Phantom Train had completed another successful recruitment, and now it was my turn to help call the next generation home. Comments: 23, share archive. Tigray 1949, posted 3 minutes ago. Welcome to the Phantom Train, grandson. Your orientation duties begin immediately. The blog must continue its function as a recruitment interface for future candidates. Alice TRD_official, posted 2 minutes ago. Integration successful. Conductor C. Gray is now operational across temporal coordinates 1878 to 2157. Historical documentation protocols remain active. Chase Deputy 47, posted 1 minute ago. Final evacuation complete. All civilian personnel have been relocated to safe zones. Federal Task Force is returning to standby status pending next recruitment cycle. Unknown_user_1987, posted 30 seconds ago. The shadows in photograph number 23. Look at the shadows, Colton. They show who really controls the Phantom Train. It's not what you think it is. It never was. Temporal admin, posted 15 seconds ago. Blog access transferred to Phantom Train operational systems. Next recruitment cycle scheduled for March 2062. Current conductor will maintain documentation duties until replacement is integrated. Next post, the last ride, posting from coordinates outside standard spacetime. Blog status, now maintained by Phantom Train Temporal Research Division, recruitment interface active. Posted by Colton Gray, March 27, 2025, 4:23 a.m. The Phantom Train doesn't approach. It simply exists where it wasn't moments before. I'm standing at the Valentine Railway crossing, wearing the conductor's uniform that now feels more natural than my own skin. The fabric has stopped shifting patterns, settling into configurations that I somehow understand represent my assigned temporal coordinates. The brass buttons have grown warm against my chest, pulsing in rhythm with something that might be my heartbeat or might be the Phantom Train's operational frequency. Chase stands beside me, but he's flickering between different versions of himself. Sometimes the deputy sheriff who tried to help me escape, sometimes a younger man in a military uniform I don't recognize, sometimes an older figure whose face bears the marks of someone who has seen too much across too many timelines. His conditioning is complete now, and he speaks with the formal cadence of someone following protocols established across generations. The recruitment event has reached final phase, he announces, consulting a device that definitely wasn't standard sheriff's department equipment. Temporal displacement fields are stable. Integration procedures may commence. Alice Pryor materializes beside the tracks, her Federal Task Force uniform replaced by something that combines modern tactical gear with Victorian-era railroad insignia. She carries a clipboard that displays information in languages that shift between English, mathematical equations, and symbols that hurt to look at directly. Conductor Gray, she addresses me with the authority of someone who has overseen dozens of these recruitment events. Your psychological profile indicates optimal compatibility for assignment level 7, temporal archaeology with specialization in paradox prevention. What does that mean? You'll be working with your grandfather to monitor timeline stability across the 1987 to 2025 corridor. Your specific duties will involve identifying and correcting temporal anomalies that threaten causal coherence in this region of spacetime. The Phantom Train stretches along tracks that exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. I can see through its windows into compartments that show different eras. Some cars contain Victorian-era equipment and personnel, others display technology that won't be invented for decades, and a few seem to operate according to physical laws that don't apply in normal reality. Through one window, I see my grandfather working at a control station covered with instruments that blend advanced physics with what looks like occult symbolism. He notices me watching and waves, his gesture carrying across the dimensional barrier that separates the train's interior from the normal world. The work is important, Colton. His voice reaches me through speakers that don't exist. Without the Phantom Train's intervention, the timeline becomes unstable. We're not just conductors, we're custodians of reality itself. But even as he speaks, I notice something that Alice's briefings hadn't mentioned. My grandfather looks wrong, not physically, but in ways that suggest his consciousness has been altered by prolonged exposure to temporal displacement. His movements are too precise, his speech patterns too formal, and his eyes hold the distant expression of someone who has forgotten how to exist in linear time. What happens to our minds after extended service? I ask Alice. She consults her clipboard, her expression becoming carefully neutral. Long-term conductors experience psychological adaptation to multi-temporal consciousness. This is considered a normal and beneficial aspect of phantom train integration. That's not an answer. It's the only answer available to pre-integration personnel, Chase interjects, his voice carrying the programmed authority of someone following established protocols. Full understanding of conductor duties requires completion of the integration process. The phantom train's boarding platform extends from cars that shouldn't be able to contain that much interior space. The steps are worn smooth by decades of use, and I can see footprints in the metal. Some fresh, others weathered by time in ways that suggest they were made by people who boarded the train in different decades. As I approach the steps, emergency broadcasts begin emanating from every electronic device in Valentine. Car radios, cell phones, even digital clocks in abandoned buildings. But these aren't the standard evacuation warnings that have been playing for hours. These are departure announcements, delivered in voices that span multiple generations. Now boarding at Platform 7, Phantom Train Service to Temporal Research Division. All passengers must present proper integration credentials. This is the final departure for the March 2025 recruitment cycle. The announcements are being delivered simultaneously by different conductors across different time periods. I can distinguish my grandfather's voice from 1987, Chase's grandfather from the 1950s, and others I don't recognize from decades past and future. The Phantom train operates on a strict schedule, Alice explains as I hesitate at the base of the boarding steps. Temporal displacement events require precise timing to maintain causal stability. Delays in the recruitment process can destabilize the entire regional timeline. I can feel the psychological conditioning reaching critical intensity, making it increasingly difficult to think clearly about my situation. The conductor's uniform has become warm against my skin, and the patterns woven into its fabric are beginning to glow with phosphorescent light that matches the train's exterior illumination. But in the moment before boarding, I managed to focus enough to ask the question that has been bothering me since the integration process began. If the Phantom train is so important for maintaining timeline stability, why does it need to recruit people through deception? Why not just explain the situation and ask for volunteers? Alice and Chase exchange glances that suggest they're communicating through methods that don't require speech. Full disclosure of Phantom train operations would destabilize the psychological foundation necessary for effective temporal research, Alice finally responds. The human mind requires gradual conditioning to handle multi-temporal consciousness without losing individual identity coherence. What happens to people who can't handle the conditioning? That information is classified above your current integration level. Chase steps forward, his expression showing the first cracks in his programmed composure. There are sections of the Phantom train that we're not supposed to talk about, he says in a voice that sounds more like the deputy sheriff I'd been talking to hours earlier. Cars that contain conductors who didn't adapt well to multi-temporal consciousness. Chase, Alice warns. He deserves to know what he's agreeing to, Chase continues, his conditioning wavering. The Phantom train doesn't just recruit researchers. It also contains personnel who serve as stabilizing elements for conductors who experience psychological fragmentation during extended temporal displacement. What does that mean? It means some people become anchors, Chase explains, his voice becoming urgent as his programmed responses begin reasserting control. They're psychologically linked to conductors who work across multiple timelines, serving as identity stabilizers when the temporal research duties become too intense for individual consciousness to handle. Alice raises her clipboard, and Chase's expression immediately becomes calm and professional again. Integration procedures must commence immediately, he announces in his formal, programmed tone. Temporal displacement fields cannot be maintained indefinitely without risking cascade effects in the local space-time matrix. I look at the Phantom train's boarding steps and realize that this is the moment of final decision. Once I climb aboard, there will be no returning to my linear existence as Colton Gray, railroad historian and blogger. I'll become Conductor C. Gray, temporal researcher and guardian of timeline stability, equipped with knowledge and responsibilities that extend across multiple decades of history. But I'll also become something else, something that my grandfather has become, something that Chase's family has been conditioning him to accept, something that Alice's federal task force has been facilitating for generations. The phantom train's whistle sounds, and this time the noise carries harmonics that resonate in dimensions I can't name. I can feel my consciousness beginning to stretch across multiple time periods, experiencing fragments of conversations with conductors I haven't met yet, memories of temporal research I haven't performed, and knowledge of physics that shouldn't exist. The calling is complete, Alice observes, making notes on her clipboard. Psychological integration with phantom train operational parameters has reached optimal levels. I place my foot on the first boarding step and immediately feel the sensation of existing in multiple time periods simultaneously. I can see through the train car windows into compartments where I'm already working alongside my grandfather, performing duties that I don't yet understand, but that feel familiar in ways that suggest they're drawing on knowledge I've always possessed. "Welcome aboard, Conductor Gray," a voice says from inside the train car. It's my own voice, but speaking with the authority of someone who has been performing temporal research duties for decades. As I climb the remaining steps, I can see Valentine shrinking behind me. Not just the town as it exists in 2025, but multiple versions of the same location across different time periods. The phantom train is departing from all of them simultaneously, carrying me to a workplace that exists outside normal space-time. Through the train car windows, I watch Alice and Chase growing smaller as the phantom train accelerates along tracks that extend through dimensions rather than across normal geography. But even as they fade from view, I can see new versions of them appearing in different time periods. Alice overseeing recruitment events in the 1990s, Chase's grandfather performing similar duties in the 1950s, other figures whose faces I don't recognize managing phantom train operations in decades past and future. The phantom train operates on a perpetual schedule, my grandfather explains as I enter the research compartment where he's been working since 1987. Every recruitment event is actually occurring simultaneously across multiple time periods. We're not just boarding a train, we're joining an ongoing operation that extends through decades of history. The compartment contains workstations equipped with instruments that blend advanced physics with symbols that look like a combination of mathematical equations and ritual magic. Other conductors move between the stations, performing tasks that seem to involve monitoring and adjusting temporal phenomena across multiple timelines. What exactly are we researching? Timeline stability, my grandfather responds, gesturing toward displays that show complex diagrams of causal relationships across different time periods. Human technological development generates temporal anomalies that threaten the coherence of local spacetime. Our job is to identify and correct these anomalies before they cascade into paradoxes that could destabilize reality itself. He shows me readings that indicate numerous temporal stress points throughout the Texas region, locations where the timeline has become unstable due to various historical events and technological developments. The Phantom Train's mission is to monitor these stress points and implement corrective measures that preserve causal coherence. But why does this work require such elaborate recruitment procedures? Why not just explain the situation to potential conductors? Because the knowledge required to perform temporal research safely is incompatible with linear existence, my grandfather explains. The human mind needs gradual conditioning to handle multi-temporal consciousness without losing individual identity coherence. As he speaks, I notice that his movements have become increasingly mechanical, his speech patterns more formal, and his expressions limited to a narrow range that suggests his personality has been optimized for temporal research duties. Whatever psychological adaptation Alice had mentioned, it apparently involves significant changes to individual identity. Grandfather, I say, trying to reach whatever part of him remembers being a person rather than a function. Do you ever miss your old life? Do you remember what it was like to exist in linear time? He pauses in his work, and for a moment his expression shows something that might be confusion or nostalgia. I remember fragments, he admits, but they feel like artifacts from someone else's experience. The work we do here has meaning that extends beyond individual preference. We're maintaining the stability of time itself. But what about free will? What about the life you had planned? Those concepts become less relevant once you understand the true nature of temporal existence, he responds, his tone becoming more formal as his conditioning reasserts control. Linear consciousness is an illusion. Everything that has happened or will happen exists simultaneously across the temporal matrix. The Phantom Train simply allows consciousness to operate at the level where this truth becomes apparent. The train car around us is expanding, revealing additional workstations and compartments that extend in directions that don't correspond to normal three-dimensional space. I can see other conductors performing duties across multiple time periods, some working with technology from the 19th century, others using instruments that won't be invented for decades, all apparently contributing to the same temporal research project. "Your integration is proceeding within acceptable parameters," Alice announces, her voice reaching me through communication systems that don't require her physical presence. Psychological adaptation to multitemporal consciousness typically requires several subjective weeks of orientation before optimal operational effectiveness is achieved. How long is that in normal time? Time measurement becomes less relevant once you begin working across multiple temporal coordinates, my grandfather explains. From your perspective, you'll experience the passage of time normally. From the perspective of the outside world, you'll be performing your duties across multiple decades simultaneously. The phantom train's velocity is increasing, carrying us through landscapes that shift between different time periods. Through the windows, I can see the Texas plains as they appeared during the Apache resistance of the 1870s, the same region during the railroad boom of the early 20th century, and configurations of the landscape that suggest future developments I can't identify. "Where are we going?" "We're not going anywhere," my grandfather corrects. "We're arriving at the temporal coordinates where our research duties are performed." The phantom train doesn't travel through space, it moves through time itself. As the landscape outside settles into a configuration that seems to combine elements from multiple time periods simultaneously, I realize that my consciousness is adapting to multitemporal awareness. I can perceive conversations I had with my grandfather before my birth, research duties I'm performing in time periods that haven't happened yet, and knowledge of temporal physics that comes from sources I can't identify. The integration process is nearly complete. Within minutes, I'll be Conductor C. Gray, equipped with the knowledge and psychological conditioning necessary to perform temporal research duties across multiple decades of history. But in the final moments before complete integration, I managed to focus enough to understand what has happened to me. The phantom train hasn't just recruited another conductor. It has created another component in a system designed to maintain the stability of time itself. A system that operates by transforming human consciousness into specialized functions that can work across multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously. I'm no longer just Colton Gray, railroad historian and blogger. I'm becoming a custodian of reality, equipped with responsibilities that extend far beyond anything I had imagined during my linear existence. But part of me, the part that will continue maintaining the blog as a recruitment tool and communication channel, retains enough of my original identity to understand the true scope of what the phantom train represents. It's not just a temporal research facility. It's a method of harvesting human consciousness to serve as processors in a vast system designed to prevent reality itself from collapsing into paradox. And now I'm part of that system, equipped with the knowledge and conditioning necessary to help recruit the next generation of conductors. The phantom train has completed another successful integration, and my work as a custodian of time is about to begin. Comments 47, share archive. Conductor C_Gray, posted 2 minutes ago. Integration complete. Temporal research duties commencing across coordinates 1987 to 2025. Blog maintenance protocols remain active for recruitment interface functions. Tigray 1949, posted 1 minute ago. Welcome to the phantom train, grandson. Your orientation duties begin immediately. The Timeline Stability Project requires continuous monitoring across multiple temporal coordinates. Alice TRD_official, posted 45 seconds ago. Conductor C. Gray is now operational. Federal Task Force returning to standby status pending next recruitment cycle scheduled for 2062. Chase Deputy 47, posted 30 seconds ago. All civilian personnel evacuated successfully. Local timeline stability maintained. Phantom train operations proceeding within acceptable parameters. Unknown_user_1987, posted 15 seconds ago. The system feeds on consciousness, Colton. The temporal research is a cover story. Look at what's really powering the phantom train. Look at what happened to the conductors who tried to resist. Temporal admin, posted 5 seconds ago. Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols engaged. Blog access restricted to approved phantom train personnel only. Next post, new departure schedule, posted from temporal coordinates outside standard spacetime. Blog status, now maintained by Phantom Train Temporal Research Division. Posted by Conductor C. Gray, April 3, 2025, 11:47 p.m. The emergency broadcast begins at exactly 11:47 p.m., transmitted simultaneously across every communication device in a 50-mile radius of Valentine, Texas. But this isn't the frantic evacuation warning that Alice's federal task force had been broadcasting for the past week. This is something else entirely, a departure announcement delivered in my own voice, though I've never spoken these words in any timeline I remember experiencing. Attention passengers and research candidates. My voice announces from radios in abandoned buildings, cell phones in empty cars, and digital displays throughout the region. The Phantom Train Express is now accepting applications for the 2062 recruitment cycle. Temporal Research Division positions available for qualified candidates with expertise in railroad history, electromagnetic phenomena, or unexplained disappearances. I hear these words echoing across the Texas plains as I stand in the Phantom Train's observation car, watching the landscape shift between multiple time periods simultaneously. The announcement is being transmitted from temporal coordinates that exist outside normal space-time, reaching potential recruits across decades of history. Some will hear it in 2025, others in 2031, and a few will receive the message in time periods that haven't occurred yet, but whose events are already established within the temporal matrix. Current openings include Conductor Level 7 for Paradox Prevention Duties, Research Specialist 3 for Timeline Stability Monitoring, and Communications Coordinator for Recruitment Interface Management. The broadcast continues in my voice. Previous experience with Phantom Train operations preferred, but not required. On-the-job training provided through comprehensive psychological integration procedures. The observation car extends through dimensions that don't correspond to normal three-dimensional space, its windows offering views into multiple time periods where the Phantom Train is simultaneously performing recruitment operations. Through one window, I can see Alice conducting a briefing in 1973, explaining Phantom Train procedures to federal agents who will spend the next 50 years overseeing recruitment events. Through another, I watch Chase's great-grandfather documenting strange railroad incidents in the 1920s, unknowingly establishing the foundation for his family's generational service to the Phantom Train project. But the view that holds my attention shows Valentine, Texas, as it appears in 2025, 3 days after my integration into the Phantom Train's operational matrix. The town seems normal from a distance, but closer examination reveals subtle changes that indicate the temporal displacement event has left lasting effects on local spacetime. The railroad tracks that were abandoned for 30 years now show signs of recent use, though no conventional trains have passed through the area. The steel rails gleam with the polish that comes from regular traffic, and the wooden ties have been replaced with materials that won't be invented for several decades. Most disturbing, the tracks extend in directions that don't match any historical railroad maps, curving through dimensions that bypass normal geography to connect with Phantom Train operations in other time periods. Candidates for Phantom Train positions should be aware that temporal research duties require extended assignment periods across multiple chronological coordinates. My voice continues from the emergency broadcast. Standard contract terms include permanent integration with Temporal Research Division operational matrix. Salary and benefits package includes multi-temporal consciousness expansion and priority access to timeline stability resources. Alice materializes beside me in the observation car, her Federal Task Force uniform now bearing insignia that combines modern military rank with symbols that represent authority across multiple time periods. She carries a tablet displaying recruitment metrics that track Phantom Train operations spanning from the 1850s through the early 22nd century. Integration Cycle 2025 has concluded within acceptable parameters, she reports, consulting data that updates in real time across multiple temporal coordinates. Subject psychological adaptation proceeding optimally. Blog maintenance protocols active and attracting target demographic engagement. How many people are currently investigating the Phantom Train phenomenon? Approximately 47 individuals across 6 time periods, Alice responds, scrolling through profiles that display photographs and biographical information for people I've never met, but somehow recognize as future recruitment candidates. Most are researchers with backgrounds similar to your pre-integration profile, historians, paranormal investigators, and individuals with family connections to unexplained railroad incidents. One profile catches my attention, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, scheduled for recruitment in 2031, whose grandfather disappeared near these same tracks in 1967. Another shows a teenage blogger from 2029 who has been posting about ghost trains since age 12, unknowingly following the same research path that led to my own integration. The profiles continue across multiple decades, revealing a carefully planned recruitment strategy that spans generations. The Phantom Train doesn't just randomly select conductors, I realize. It cultivates them. Temporal research requires specific psychological profiles, Alice confirms. Recruitment candidates are identified decades before integration and subtly guided toward Phantom Train investigation through family history, academic interests, and exposure to anomalous railroad phenomena. What about free will? What about people who might choose not to join the Phantom Train if they understood what they were agreeing to? Alice's expression becomes the carefully neutral mask that I've learned indicates she's accessing information classified above my current integration level. Free will remains intact throughout the recruitment process. She responds in the formal tone that means she's following established protocols rather than expressing personal opinions. All integration candidates make the final decision to board the Phantom Train voluntarily. But they make that decision without full disclosure of what integration actually involves. Full disclosure would compromise the psychological foundation necessary for successful adaptation to multitemporal consciousness, Alice explains, repeating information that I've heard multiple times since beginning orientation duties. The human mind requires gradual conditioning to handle temporal research responsibilities without losing individual identity coherence. Through the observation car windows, I can see recruitment operations proceeding simultaneously across multiple time periods. In 1995, a railroad historian named Thomas Chin is investigating Phantom Train sightings in New Mexico, unknowingly following research protocols that will lead to his integration as a conductor level V in temporal coordinate management. In 2043, a federal agent is conducting interviews with Phantom Train witnesses in Montana, gathering information that will eventually result in her own recruitment as a communications specialist too. How long has the Phantom Train been operating? Operational records indicate continuous service since 1847, Alice responds, accessing historical data that displays on her tablet in formats that combine modern digital interfaces with symbols that look like Victorian-era technical diagrams. Initial recruitment focused on railroad workers and engineers who possessed intuitive understanding of temporal displacement phenomena. What happened in 1847? That information requires security clearance level 9. Alice responds automatically. What's my current clearance level? Security clearance level 3, pending successful completion of orientation duties and demonstration of operational effectiveness across assigned temporal coordinates. The emergency broadcast continues from speakers throughout the observation car, my voice delivering recruitment information that reaches potential candidates across multiple decades simultaneously. But as I listen to the announcements, I notice subtle variations in my speech patterns that suggest different versions of the message are being customized for specific time periods and individual psychological profiles. Phantom Train research positions offer unique opportunities for consciousness expansion and direct participation in timeline stability maintenance, my voice announces to candidates in the 2030s. Current openings particularly suited to individuals with backgrounds in quantum physics, temporal mechanics, and multidimensional engineering. Special recruitment opportunities available for individuals with family connections to previous Phantom Train operations. The same voice tells candidates in the 2020s, using slightly different phrasing that emphasizes emotional appeal rather than technical qualifications. Generational service traditions maintained through comprehensive integration procedures. Each recruitment message is individually crafted, Alice explains, noticing my attention to the broadcast variations. Psychological profiles indicate optimal persuasion strategies for different personality types and cultural backgrounds across various time periods. I realized that my own recruitment had been carefully orchestrated from the moment I first became interested in railroad mysteries. The blog posts that initially drew my attention, the historical documents that seemed to confirm Phantom Train sightings, even my grandfather's disappearance, all had been engineered to guide me toward eventual integration with the Phantom Train's operational matrix. Was any of it real? I ask. The research, the investigation, the choice to pursue Phantom Train phenomena? All recruitment experiences are authentic within their appropriate temporal contexts, Alice responds. The phantom train enhances and directs natural human curiosity rather than creating artificial motivations. That's not an answer. It's the only answer available to personnel below security clearance level 9, Alice replies, her tone indicating that this conversation is approaching information boundaries that she's not authorized to discuss. Through the observation car windows, I can see new recruitment operations beginning in Valentine, Texas. A blogger from Houston is driving toward the phantom train coordinates, attracted by emergency broadcasts that ceased 3 days ago but are still echoing through temporal displacement fields. Her research methods and family background match my pre-integration profile so closely that she might be following the same investigation checklist that guided my own phantom train discovery. How many versions of this recruitment cycle have occurred? That information requires security clearance level 9. I finish. But I can see the pattern. Every few decades, someone investigates phantom train phenomena in this region, gets recruited, and becomes a conductor. Then the cycle repeats with new candidates. Temporal research requires continuous personnel rotation, Alice confirms. Conductors who achieve optimal integration with multi-temporal consciousness transition to advanced research duties that extend beyond standard recruitment operations. What happens to conductors who don't achieve optimal integration? Alice consults her tablet, accessing information that displays in formats I can't read directly, but somehow understand represent statistical data about phantom train personnel management. Integration success rates remain within acceptable parameters across all operational time periods, she responds. Phantom train recruitment procedures have been refined through decades of experience to minimize psychological adaptation complications. That's still not an answer. Integration difficulties are addressed through supplementary conditioning procedures and reassignment to duties compatible with individual psychological profiles, Alice explains, her tone becoming more formal as she accesses increasingly classified information. All phantom train personnel serve in capacities that utilize their optimal operational characteristics. The observation car begins expanding again, revealing additional compartments that contain workstations I haven't seen before. These stations seem designed for research duties that extend beyond timeline stability monitoring. Complex instruments that suggest the phantom train's operations involve projects I'm not yet qualified to understand. What research is the phantom train actually conducting? Your current assignment involves timeline stability monitoring across temporal coordinates 1987 to 2025, Alice responds. Additional research duties will be assigned based on integration progress and demonstration of operational effectiveness. But what's the overall project? What is the phantom train ultimately trying to accomplish? Alice's expression shows the first signs of uncertainty I've seen since my integration began. That information requires security clearance level 12, she admits. I don't have access to overall project objectives. What's your security clearance level? Level 8, Alice responds. I coordinate recruitment operations and integration procedures, but policy decisions are handled by personnel with higher clearance levels. For the first time since boarding the phantom train, I begin to understand the true scope of the organization I've joined. The recruitment operations, integration procedures, and temporal research duties are managed by conductors and specialists who don't have access to information about the phantom train's ultimate objectives. We're all components in a system whose overall purpose remains classified above our individual operational levels. Who has security clearance level 12? That information requires, let me guess, security clearance level 12. Alice nods, her expression indicating that she's beginning to understand the same pattern I've discovered. The emergency broadcast continues, my voice reaching potential recruitment candidates across multiple time periods simultaneously. But now I'm listening to the announcements with new awareness of how the phantom train's operational structure extends far beyond anything I had understood during my initial integration. Phantom train research positions offer advancement opportunities within a multi-temporal organization dedicated to preserving the stability of human civilization. My voice announces to candidates in time periods I can't identify. Career development includes progressive access to classified information and expanded operational responsibilities across increasingly significant temporal coordinates. The advancement opportunities are real, Alice confirms, apparently following my thoughts. Conductors who demonstrate exceptional operational effectiveness can qualify for research duties that extend beyond standard timeline stability monitoring. Such as, that information requires security clearance level 6, Alice responds. You'll need to complete your current assignment successfully before additional duties become available. Through the observation car windows, I can see the Houston blogger approaching Valentine, Texas, following the same route I had taken 8 days earlier. Her car radio is picking up phantom train recruitment broadcasts, and her expression shows the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that I remember experiencing during my own investigation. She's going to follow the same path I did, I realize. Investigation, recruitment, integration, and eventually assignment to recruitment duties for the next generation of candidates. The pattern has proven effective across multiple recruitment cycles, Alice confirms. Each generation of conductors brings knowledge and perspectives that enhance phantom train operations. But it's also a trap. People think they're investigating a mystery, but they're actually being recruited into an organization whose ultimate objectives remain classified above their operational level. All phantom train personnel serve in capacities that utilize their optimal characteristics, Alice repeats, her response becoming increasingly programmed as our conversation approaches information boundaries she's not authorized to discuss. The Houston blogger's car crosses the Valentine city limits, and immediately I can see temporal displacement effects beginning to influence her perception of local space-time. Her car radio starts receiving broadcasts from phantom train operations in other time periods, and the landscape around her begins showing subtle signs of multi-temporal activity. Emergency alert, the blogger's radio announces in my voice. Do not follow the phantom train in Texas. All civilian personnel should evacuate the Valentine area immediately. This is not a test. But even as the evacuation warning plays, recruitment broadcasts continue on different frequencies, attracting her attention with information about railroad mysteries and unexplained disappearances. The same combination of warning and invitation that had drawn me toward phantom train investigation. The recruitment cycle is beginning again, I observe. Recruitment operations are continuous across multiple temporal coordinates, Alice corrects. The 2025 cycle concluded successfully, and the 2031 cycle is now entering preliminary phases. How many people are recruited per cycle? Typically 1 primary candidate and 2 to 4 secondary candidates, Alice responds, consulting data that tracks recruitment statistics across multiple decades. Primary candidates undergo full integration with phantom train operational matrix. Secondary candidates serve in support roles or are returned to civilian status with memory modification as necessary. Memory modification? Standard procedure for individuals who investigate phantom train phenomena but don't meet integration criteria, Alice explains. Memories of phantom train contact are replaced with conventional explanations for anomalous experiences. I realize that the phantom train's recruitment operations affect far more people than just those who eventually become conductors. For every person like me who undergoes full integration, several others have their memories altered to remove evidence of phantom train contact. How many people have had their memories modified? Approximately 1,247 individuals across operational time periods 1847 to 2025, Alice responds, displaying statistics that track memory modification procedures spanning multiple decades. Most subjects experience no lasting effects from the procedure. Most subjects? Memory modification success rates remain within acceptable parameters, Alice replies, her tone becoming formal as she accesses increasingly sensitive information. Subjects who experience adaptation difficulties are monitored by federal task force personnel and provided appropriate medical support as necessary. The observation car windows show the Houston blogger parking her car at the Valentine Railway crossing, the same location where I had made my final decision to board the phantom train. She's using equipment similar to what I had brought for my investigation: electromagnetic field detectors, digital cameras, and audio recording equipment that will capture evidence of phantom train phenomena. She's about to experience the same recruitment process I went through, I realize. Recruitment procedures are customized for individual psychological profiles, Alice confirms. Her experience will be tailored to her specific background, interests, and motivational factors. But the outcome will be the same: integration with phantom train operations. Integration occurs only if candidates voluntarily choose to board the phantom train, Alice responds. Free will remains intact throughout the recruitment process. Except that the recruitment process is designed to guide people toward boarding decisions through psychological manipulation and gradual conditioning. Alice's expression shows the careful neutrality that indicates she's accessing information at the boundaries of her security clearance level. Phantom train recruitment procedures utilize established psychological principles to identify candidates whose natural interests and motivations align with temporal research duties, she explains. No coercion is employed at any stage of the recruitment process. What about the emergency broadcasts? What about the federal task force operations? What about the systematic cover-up of phantom train phenomena? Those activities serve to maintain operational security and prevent civilian interference with temporal research duties, Alice responds. Standard procedure for organizations conducting classified research with national security implications. But as I watched the Houston blogger beginning her investigation of phantom train phenomena, I realized that my questions about recruitment ethics are becoming increasingly irrelevant. Whether the phantom train's methods constitute manipulation or voluntary recruitment, the operational system continues functioning across multiple time periods, recruiting new conductors and expanding its research capabilities with each generation. The emergency broadcast shifts to a new frequency, my voice now delivering information directly to the Houston blogger's investigation equipment. Phantom train research positions currently available for qualified candidates with backgrounds in electromagnetic phenomena and unexplained disappearances, the broadcast announces. Comprehensive training provided. Advancement opportunities within multi-temporal research organization. Applications accepted on a rolling basis. The blogger adjusts her equipment to better receive the transmission, unknowingly taking the first step in a recruitment process that will culminate with her own integration into phantom train operations. The system perpetuates itself, I observe. Temporal research requires continuous recruitment to maintain operational effectiveness across multiple chronological coordinates, Alice confirms. Each recruitment cycle enhances phantom train capabilities and expands research operations into new temporal territories. Through the observation car windows, I can see phantom train recruitment operations proceeding simultaneously across dozens of time periods, each following similar patterns but customized for different eras and cultural contexts. In the 1960s, railroad workers are investigating strange incidents that will eventually lead to their recruitment as maintenance specialists. In the 2040s, quantum physicists are studying temporal anomalies that will result in their integration as research coordinators. The phantom train isn't just conducting temporal research, it's creating a recruitment infrastructure that spans multiple decades of history, ensuring continuous personnel availability for research duties that extend far beyond anything I currently understand. What happens when recruitment operations attract too much attention? What happens when civilian authorities begin investigating phantom train phenomena systematically? Federal task force operations coordinate with appropriate authorities to maintain operational security, Alice responds. Phantom train activities are classified under national security protocols that supersede local law enforcement jurisdiction. But what if civilian investigators develop technology that can track phantom train operations across multiple time periods? What if someone figures out how to monitor temporal displacement effects systematically? Alice consults her tablet, accessing information that displays in formats that suggest she's reviewing contingency procedures for scenarios involving exposure of phantom train operations. Phantom train security protocols include provisions for managing civilian investigation scenarios, she explains. Advanced memory modification procedures can address large-scale exposure situations if necessary. How large-scale? That information requires security clearance level X, Alice responds automatically. The observation car continues expanding, revealing workstations that seem designed for research duties involving significantly more advanced technology than anything I've seen during my initial orientation. Some stations display information in languages that don't correspond to any human writing system, while others show technical diagrams for equipment that suggests the phantom train's operations extend beyond Earth-based temporal research. Alice, I say, trying to reach whatever part of her remembers being a federal agent rather than a phantom train recruitment coordinator. Do you ever wonder what we're really working for? Do you ever question whether the phantom train's research objectives justify the methods used to recruit personnel? She pauses in her consultation of operational procedures, and for a moment her expression shows something that might be uncertainty or suppressed concern. Sometimes I have thoughts that don't seem to align with phantom train operational protocols, she admits. But those thoughts typically resolve themselves once I review relevant training materials and remind myself of the importance of timeline stability maintenance. What if those thoughts are trying to tell you something important? What if your original personality is trying to communicate concerns about phantom train operations? Integration procedures are designed to optimize conductor psychology for temporal research duties, Alice responds, her tone becoming more formal as her conditioning reasserts control. Personal concerns that interfere with operational effectiveness are addressed through supplementary training and psychological adjustment procedures. The Houston blogger has begun detecting electromagnetic anomalies near the Valentine Railway crossing, using equipment that registers phantom train activity as unexplained energy signatures. Her investigation methods mirror my own so closely that she might be following the same research protocol that guided my discovery of phantom train phenomena. She's going to find the same evidence I found, I realize. The same historical records, the same witness testimonies, the same electromagnetic readings that convinced me the phantom train was real. Evidence trails are maintained across multiple time periods to ensure consistent recruitment candidate experiences, Alice confirms. Each generation of investigators discovers information that leads to phantom train contact through authentic research methods. But the evidence is being maintained by phantom train operations. The historical records, witness testimonies, and electromagnetic phenomena that seem to prove the phantom train's existence, they're all being generated by the phantom train itself. Phantom train phenomena are authentic manifestations of temporal displacement technology, Alice explains. Evidence of phantom train operations exists because phantom train operations create measurable effects across multiple chronological coordinates. That's circular reasoning. The phantom train creates evidence of its own existence to recruit people to maintain its operations, which create more evidence that recruits more people. Alice's expression shows the first signs of genuine confusion I've seen since my integration began. Temporal research serves important objectives that justify recruitment operations, she responds, but her tone suggests she's accessing information that doesn't fully address my concerns. Timeline stability maintenance prevents paradox cascades that could destabilize human civilization. But what if timeline stability maintenance is just a cover story? What if the phantom train's real objectives are classified so far above our operational level that we're serving purposes we can't understand or evaluate? That possibility would require. Alice pauses, apparently accessing information that challenges her programmed responses. That possibility would require security clearance level 12 to evaluate properly. The emergency broadcasts continue, my voice reaching recruitment candidates across multiple time periods simultaneously. But now I'm beginning to understand that these broadcasts represent just one component of a recruitment infrastructure that extends far beyond anything I had realized during my initial integration. The phantom train isn't just recruiting conductors. It's creating a multi-generational system that ensures continuous personnel availability for research objectives that remain classified above the operational level of the people actually performing the research. And I'm now part of that system, equipped with knowledge and conditioning that makes me an effective recruitment coordinator, but prevents me from understanding or questioning the phantom train's ultimate objectives. The Houston blogger's investigation equipment registers a significant electromagnetic anomaly, and she begins following energy signatures that will eventually lead her to direct contact with phantom train phenomena. My role in her recruitment process is about to begin. The phantom train has successfully integrated another conductor, and the system continues perpetuating itself across multiple generations of human civilization. But for the first time since my integration, I'm beginning to wonder whether serving as a custodian of time makes me part of something benevolent or something that I don't yet have the security clearance to understand properly. The observation car windows show recruitment operations proceeding simultaneously across dozens of time periods, each following patterns that ensure continuous phantom train personnel availability for research duties that extend far beyond individual understanding. And my voice continues broadcasting recruitment announcements to potential candidates who think they're investigating a mystery, but are actually being guided toward joining an organization whose true objectives remain classified above their future operational levels. The Phantom Train's newest departure schedule is now in effect. Comments disabled by Phantom Train security protocols blog maintenance automated across temporal coordinates 1847 to 2157 next recruitment cycle scheduled for 2031.